Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Critical Podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Good, and joining me once again is my very special friend, incredibly special, Mr. Manny Perez. Manny, how you doing, my friend?
Hello. It's good to see you again, man. I was so happy that you reached back out and asked for me to join with this in this next adventure that will go on. I had a blast doing the Two Towers show with you, so I'm ready to get into it. I'm very excited.
I'm glad because I felt bad because I was like, okay, I'm gonna invite him back to see if he's interested because it was so much fun talking about Two Towers. I'm like, I almost like want to wait like a year and then be like, all right, let's just do Fellowship with you too.
Right.
But I was like, oh, we talked for a long time and maybe you wouldn't want to come back and do this. I was like, I'll just ask anyway just to see.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm glad because not only are you someone that I just enjoy talking to and I like having a reason to talk to you, but it's nice that you are such a passionate fan and you know so much about Lord of the Rings that we could just talk about this. And again, you watch it so frequently. At any moment, at any day, I could probably ping you and you'd be like, yeah, I'm happy to talk about that for 3 hours. Like,
For sure. Yeah. And again, like I said last time, like any excuse to talk about Lord of the Rings is a fantastic excuse. So yeah, man, thanks for inviting me back. This is fun.
Yeah, well, and as Manny's been alluding to, for anyone who's just like tuning in and for someone who didn't look at the actual title, today we're talking about Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Man, like just saying that I get like some kind of goosebumps. It's like, okay, be cool.
Yeah.
All right. And yeah, so we've gone through Fellowship, we've gone through Two Towers, and now we're getting into Return of the King. So if you haven't watched these films before, I'd recommend that you do because we're going to go full spoilers right from the get-go because this is a movie that is weirdly getting close. This whole franchise getting close to 20 years old. Like
that's nuts.
It's like, it freaks me out a little bit thinking of like little 12-year-old Jimmy sitting in the theaters watching these, just like, and just losing my mind. But so we're going to kind of go through, like we did last time, go through in segments of groups, but I kind of switched it up this time because I wanted to keep it fresh. Because I was like, oh, we could start with Frodo and Sam again, but I think they're kind of one of the biggest deals in this one, obviously. So we're going to start with another little group, a kind of a pairing or a trio, as it were, because this movie is more of like a reformation a little bit of the Fellowship, which is pretty cool. I love that. But we're going to start with Merry, Pippin, and Gandalf. Okay, so Merry and Pippin, up until this point, Manny, for me, like, I've enjoyed them. I think in one, they're much more the comic relief. They're just kind of there.
Yeah.
In two, they start to really affect things and see how the world is changing. But this one I really love because it does something that Fellowship at the end kind of does, where it separates these two, one of the strongest bonds maybe, kind of separates them and says like, all right, what would it be like if we took like these kind of really best friends who are kind of attached at the hip and we're like, nope, you guys can't be together anymore, and one of you is going to hang out with Rohan, one of you is going to hang out with Gondor, and how that affects them and like how they change because of that. Like, I love that. Do you have a favorite between the two, or just like, you know, like what happens to them?
It's definitely tough to have a favorite. I don't think I like favor one over the other. I really do like what you mentioned, their change and like how they kind of evolve, because I think in the Fellowship and maybe a little less so in Two Towers, and then definitely far less so in Return of the King, you have this idea of like people who rely on each other for strength and stability and safety and comfort. And then when those kind of bonds are broken, when those relationships are tested, because they're on their own, they kind of have to dig deep and like figure out how to source their stability and safety and comfort from themselves. And so it really does, in so many ways, Return of the King is like a kind of a coming of age film and like coming to terms with your own strengths and your own weaknesses and your own power. And so I think if you look at Merry and Pippin in a vacuum, in isolation from the rest of the Fellowship and the rest of sort of the action, they really do go through this like journey of like coming to terms with what their own strengths are, even in the face of like defeat and pain and massive failure. So it's really cool to watch how they kind of like mature. Like, I think they really like settle into a state of maturity in this third film. And it's super fun to watch. It's really great.
Yeah, I think more so for me, I look at Pippin, who I think Merry starts to take this a bit more seriously, obviously, in Two Towers, where he's like, Pippin, there's not going to be a Shire if we don't like do this. Right. And then Pippin, it starts to kind of dawn on him a little bit more. And that's where Pippin's like, oh, you know, like, what if, let's be a little tricky here and kind of trick the Ents into fighting for almost. But then you get this like moment where, and I don't know if it's a halfling thing, they just like some shiny things, and Pippin picks up the Palantir of Saruman's and ends up kind of becoming a focal point for this movie for a little bit, where Sauron thinks, oh my gosh, I found the guy who's got my ring. He's like, I found him. And then like Pippin, I love it, who's completely he doesn't understand. He's oblivious to the fact that he could be like the target of this like crazy force. And Mary's like, dude, you got to get out of here. And I can't really, like, he could have gone with maybe, but he's like, I'm not going with you. You gotta go. And
Yep.
Gandalf's just like, all right, well, let's go. Let's just go and hang out in Minas Tirith together, buddy. And kind of watching Pippin like learn all of that, and then just like feeling bad about what happens when he gets there, meets Denethor, who's great, by the way. Meets Denethor, and you find out like about Boromir, or at least Pippin does, and he kind of has this one line, which I think is from the extended, where he says like, a mighty man can be felled by one arrow, and Boromir was struck by many. And it's like, like that. And he's like, I'm in service to you now. It's like, oh, that's great, even though he's kind of a like a pretty horrible dude, but it's a cool perspective point for us as the audience to kind of get into the inner workings of like Gondor's leadership from a really naive point of view, which I really enjoy.
Totally. And I think there's so many connections to the, what we learn in the Fellowship, which is the hobbits represent like purity, and they represent innocence, and they represent I don't want to say complacency, but just like being like comfortable with one's own life. And so I think, especially in the Two Towers, especially in the Return of the King with Merry and Pippin, you really see that innocence and that purity being tested. And so you look at the challenges that they face and how they, kind of how they bounce back from those challenges, and you really begin to understand like just like the scale of the what's the word I'm looking for, like the corruption and the evil that is the Ring and Sauron. And so when you have that moment where he's like, I'm in service to you now, Denethor, like you kind of feel bad, because you're like, man, things were so much more simple and things were so much more easy in the Shire. And the way that they face the challenges is really interesting, and I think super relatable to us, to people. When we face challenges, I think the times right now are a good example of that. When we face evil or sadness or pain, it's on us to react to that appropriately. And sometimes our reactions and our responses aren't the smartest. And I think, promising loyalty to Denethor maybe wasn't the best move at first, but I think it's just a good example of somebody that's like really being tested by massive evil and corruption, and just like trying to make the best of it, trying to find solace where he can.
Oh, totally. And I think it's such a cool way to tie Pippin into this new world that we got a hint of in Two Towers. That's, again, more the extended edition with the family dynamic of Boromir, Faramir, and their father Denethor, the steward of Gondor. And it's so fun to like watch like the aftermath of all that stuff, where like you really get that confrontation where Pippin's watching Faramir basically like say like to his dad, like he's like, you basically, if you would have had it the other way, right, you'd have me be dead and Boromir be alive. And Denethor's like, yeah, dude, I'd rather be dead. And Pippin's like, this is the guy I just swore loyalty to, because he was all sad. He's sitting in his little black chair at the bottom, like he's not sitting at the king's chair with the horn that's broken. And he's like, oh, that's, I swore service and loyalty to, a grieving father, not this like horrible monster who's just sitting here eating just like tomatoes and grapes and stuff, and you're like, oh my gosh, this guy
and the
sucks.
way he eats is so gross. Like that scene is one of my favorites, because it's just like, it's like visceral. It's really disturbing, and he's like sing for me, do you know any songs? Like, sing while I eat, and so it's just like it's a really good representation of like the evil of man. And there's so many examples of that, like going back to the Fellowship and understanding, especially Aragorn's sort of his journey, his character arc. There's a lot of hints that's like there's a lot of those messages that like some men give into the evil, some men give into the corruption, and others like Aragorn and some others remain pure. But that scene is such a great like slap in the face, where it's like, this guy's horrible, this guy's really bad.
Oh yeah, and I think it really I give credit to the filmmakers here, because they show so much restraint in this moment, because they do that kind of him eating a few times, but the one where he's like Billy Boyd singing, Pippin singing, which is a great little song, and they show like Faramir and his like kind of his group, not many of them on horses, going to retake Osgiliath, even though it's it's a crazy, like it's a kamikaze, it's just a suicide mission basically,
right?
And it's all the singing and all this, but it's like kind of slow paced, and you don't see what actually happens until you see Faramir coming back in, like wounded, like falling off of his horse. And it's so good, because they could have easily been like, all right, show all the horses get murdered and everybody gets slaughtered. And it's like, nope, they didn't. They just cut from that, and it just goes back to Denethor. And Pippin just starts to like weep quietly, like in the corner. He's just like starts to cry because he like
Yeah.
knows what's happening. It's just like, oh,
Yeah, and he kind of realizes his like mistake. He realizes who he actually pledged loyalty to, and I think it's just also a good example of like him realizing the stakes and him realizing what the actual realistic circumstances of what's going on.
yeah. And I just, I think Faramir is kind of a sleeper hit. And I
Hmm.
love that he builds like a little relationship with Pippin. And the first time he sees him, Pippin like kind of feels he kind of like looks away because Faramir's like staring at him when he shows up in Minas Tirith. And
Yeah,
Gandalf's like, "This isn't the first halfling to cross your path." And he's like, "No, man." He's like,
he's like,
"I've
it's
seen
fair
two
not.
others." And like,
Yeah,
it's so lucky that it was Faramir and not the other way around. I think Boromir, because if that would have been the case, it'd be like Boromir would have shown back up in Minas Tirith with like both Frodo and Sam like in his clutches and be like, "I got
yep,
the ring!" Like,
yeah,
Gandalf
totally.
would have been like, "Ah, oh, dude, what are you doing?
Come on,
Come
man.
on!" But I
Yeah,
like that Faramir. This time for me, it felt a little bit that like Faramir doesn't supplant Boromir's like moment or place in the Fellowship, but kind of is like the switch hitter in a way for the Fellowship, and he kind of ambles into it, even though he's not formally part of it. Like he just
yep,
becomes part of it because of circumstance and his brother. Like that, I think that's so cool. I'm like, oh
definitely,
man, what a good dude, right? Like,
definitely.
good on you, Faramir.
Yeah, and I think Frodo's line in, I guess it was the Two Towers, where he's like, I wish none of this had ever come to me. I think like that sentiment is so true for a lot of characters. Like I think Faramir had different plans, and then circumstances were such that he kind of had to be that switch hitter and be like, well, I wish this didn't happen to me, but like I gotta do what's right, kind of thing. And the same thing with Boromir for sure. And so I think the sentiment of like, man, I envision things going a different way, and now I have to adjust. Like that sentiment is so true for so many characters throughout the films.
Yes, and like I said, we'll kind of stick with like in the realm of Minas Tirith because we'll get back to that.
Hmm.
But Gandalf being there and kind of being a little bit like kind of doing what he did in Two Towers, where he has to go to a new place and he realizes that the higher ups are kind of having problems. He's got to whip people into shape, and I think that's kind of great. And now he's kind of flipped also sides with like being with Aragorn, where he's like, all right, Aragorn, you're going to be the guy who comes and sweeps in and takes everything and kind of
Yeah.
like finishes the fight. And I'm just going to be like, I'm going to hold down the fort. And how just frustrated Gandalf seems because I love that how powerful Gandalf is and how like not powerful Pippin is, but both of them
Right.
end up in the same circumstance where they're like, all right, there's like this official who's kind of he has the law here, he is his law, like word is law. We can't do anything to stop this guy, but we can kind of manipulate things, and like it's like, all right,
Hmm.
go light the beacons, and like he's like, oh, what would happen if we kind of move this stuff along, and Gandalf also taking over the defenses of Minas Tirith. Such a great moment. And also, like,
Definitely.
I would rather follow, Gandalf into war than Denethor for sure. Like, even
Oh,
if Denethor
totally.
was like, you should fight, like, when Gandalf's like, everybody go back to your stations, you're like, yes,
Yeah.
sir. Like,
Like, okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I'll do that.
yeah, I'll die for you. But yeah, I like Gandalf's good in this, man. Like he's always
Hmm.
good, but I love seeing how frustrated he is because like with Saruman and Theoden, he goes in and immediately there's a switch up. In this one, it's not that. He's just it's a grieving father who's kind of given up, and he's really angry with the world. And Gandalf's like, well, I can't magic that away. You can't
Right.
just go up and be like, get out of there, like
Yeah,
he can't do that,
definitely.
and that's so
Because it's a
cool.
very like Denethor's challenge, his struggle is a very organic one. It's not like he's not being poisoned by Grima Wormtongue. He's not like being possessed by Sauron. He is a grieving father who kind of has lost his mind. And so you're right, like Gandalf can't magic that away. And much like in real life when people lose loved ones, like it's not something that you can just magic away. That pain and that suffering is something that sticks with you. And so I think it was hard. I think maybe the first time I watched the Return of the King to sympathize with Denethor, but upon every time I watch it, I'm like, yeah, I totally feel bad for him. Like I definitely, it sucks that he's such a jerk and so evil ultimately. But that pain and that suffering that he goes through, it's really organic and it's very it's relatable. It's a human challenge. It's a human kind of suffering.
Yeah. I love that shot too, where he finally freaks out, goes out, and it's kind of like a reverse kind of circumstance in Two Towers, where Saruman goes out with Green Tongue and it shows off the Uruk-hai army. But this one where Denethor goes out and they're playing the music, and you like look over and you see like 100,000 orcs just in formation, and he's like, oh, everybody run for your lives.
Yeah.
It's just like, I would see that if you weren't prepared for that. If you were just stuck in your little room and you're just eating all the time and you're like, whatever, it's fine. And then you went out there and you're like, oh my God, we're all going to die. Like,
totally. And I think it happens a lot in the Return of the King. So many people get to the end of their rope, and so many people, it's like, it really, I think a theme of the Return of the King is like, what do you do when you're at the end of the rope, when your back's against the wall? And so I think like seeing how, like, almost like if you had like a counter of like how many people give into the despair and give into like, well, we're all screwed, or whether they rise up and try to fight the challenge. I think it's really interesting because the theme of like, what do you do when all hope is lost kind of thing. I think that is like super, super powerful throughout the Return of the King.
Yeah, and I think, talking about that and then kind of like trying to find hope in really desperate situations really cultivates in the relationship that we get between Gandalf and Pippin. Because in the past, it's been, even in the beginning of this one, Gandalf's still just like, you fool overtook, stop, you're just, everything you touch is ruined. But they, like, the perspective that you get between these two, because they're kind of out of their element a little bit, because they're kind of just like watching this coming darkness. And there's so many moments where like Pippin's talking to Gandalf and just kind of looks to him for wisdom. And one of the parts that always gets me is when, they've been pushed all the way back in Minas Tirith, and it's just those two, and they're sitting there, and they've got like the guards who are holding the door shut, and Pippin's just like, I didn't think it would end like this. And then Gandalf goes into a speech about death in the end, and not really, being an ending. And man, that's so, like, it's so powerful. And goodness sakes, Ian McKellen, man, like every time I watch him, just like, it's perfect.
Yeah.
Like, it's perfect. Like,
I mean, like, we could talk about casting all day, but like, Stuart McKellen, he's incredible. And the way, like, his inflection, his intonation, his pronunciation, like everything, he just embodies the character of Gandalf so well. And I think you get a lot of the more kind of like philosophical Gandalf in Return of the King. I think he's very like big picture. He has those moments of frustration. There's a point where he's essentially debating with Aragorn. He's like, it's only a matter of time. Like, Frodo's screwed. He has to go so far. He has so much more to go. But then, he does kind of have that like big picture philosophical kind of seeing the whole scale of the challenge. And I think, seeing that kind of Gandalf so much is awesome, because you get a lot of those. I mean, you get those amazing one-liners, you get those amazing moments where he's like, does a monologue, and you're like, I want that on my grave, on my tombstone. That's amazing. Yeah. So it's a really great version of Gandalf that we get in the Return of the King.
Oh, totally. And I forgot, I got this mixed up. It's actually Gandalf in the beginning in the Golden Hall who's kind of like, he's like, man, Frodo, I don't know if he's still alive. And Aragorn is the one who kind of comes and gives him that comfort. He's like, what does your heart tell you? And Gandalf kind of looks at him like, what? Oh, you know what? He's still alive. And like, Aragorn's like, Like, there's just that kind of like, and Aragorn is just, well, we'll get to him, but he's just kind of like the rock in this one, even though it's probably the scariest time for him. He's just like, everybody chill. Everybody's going to be okay. Yep. I'm going to try my best. And
just like we talked about in the Two Towers, he is the counter to so many people's frustration and sadness. You know what I mean? And even in the face of like apparent defeat or apparent despair, he's the one that's like, no, we need to have hope. We're going to be all right. We're going to figure this out. Everything from like Helm's Deep and the interactions that he has with Gandalf. He's the guy that's like, what does your heart tell you? We're going to be okay. Even like the wisest, most stable person in arguably the trilogy, Gandalf is like rattled. He's shook. And Aragorn's the one that's like, no, we're going to figure this one out.
Yeah. It's just, it's great. It's nice to see, like, also it's funny too, where Gandalf, he's become more powerful than ever, but in some ways he's more vulnerable than ever, because he's just like, I'm so rational. And then there's like these moments later on where he's like, I sent Frodo to his death. Like, he's kind of, and it's like, whoa, dude, like you're thinking about this right now? I'd be like, I'd be like, this is like the final inning, or it's like the final few moments, and you're just like, now you're freaking out about it. But I love him in Minas Tirith. I think that like it fits like his look, and just like the White Wizard in there fighting. He does the whole like, dual wielding with Glamdring and like his staff and stuff, and Pippin gets that one cool stab in, and you're like, the hobbits really get to murder some people. They movie.
Totally shine.
They kill a lot, which is great. There's a lot of good moments. It feels good. But talking about one of the other, main hobbits, Merry, who kind of gets more involved with Rohan this time, and kind of becoming, a little esquire, as it would. And his relationship, even though it's brief, where you don't see a lot of it with Theoden, where he's like, I really want to help, I really want to fight. And Theoden's like, you know what? I'd be lucky to have you. Like, Theoden is like, he's become a much nicer dude after his victory. Even though for a little bit there, he's still got that kind of pompous Two Towers. He's like, well, where was Gondor? He's like, well, whatever. But I love that he just takes Merry in immediately. Whereas Denethor, he does take him, but it's such a different relationship. And Theoden doesn't like hold it over Merry. He's like, yeah, you can join us, but sorry, you can't ride with anybody, and you're just gonna have to like stay here. And
and I think comparing Theoden and Denethor is super interesting because you have two fathers who are challenged in the exact same way, and I think they respond to that challenge so differently. Obviously Theoden in the Two Towers struggles and he hits that bottom and he's like just drowning in despair, but like you said, he really comes out the other end, especially after Helm's Deep. He comes out a little bit stronger, I think, and he comes out with a little bit more hope, and that's why he's willing to kind of give Merry this chance, and he's willing to invite Merry into the challenge. And he's like, no, if we're going to do this, we're going to do this together. Whereas Denethor is like, I don't know, man. I'm just going to eat. I sent my son to go do some things. He's probably going to die anyway. Let's hide, know? And so like the difference between those two is super interesting because they go through pretty much the exact same thing. And the way they respond could not be more different.
Yeah. And I wonder too, if Denethor had another person in his life like Éowyn, if he might have been different, just because you start to see this interesting dynamic where it's like, yeah, she's his niece, but he starts treating her like, in Two Towers, he's like, I should have been there. I should have been the father, she didn't have. And this one, it's very much like he starts to respect and understand who she is even more so. And I love that he doesn't give it to Éomer. He doesn't say like, hey, if anything happens to me, you're going to be next up. Like he says to Éowyn, he's like, because I think he figures Éomer is going to die in battle too. But I love that he's like, Éowyn, he's like, long may you defend Edoras. He's like, go be a queen and stuff. And I know it sucks that it didn't work out with Aragorn, but like, it's okay. You're still going to be good. I love that. Exactly. It's so cool. Yeah.
And Éowyn has such a great, there's some huge moments in Return of the King for her, but her story throughout the film is really incredible. She's one of my favorites for sure.
Oh yeah, and I love that. I think her and Merry, it's a really cool dynamic because it's very similar for them, and it's even more frustrating for Éowyn because she's always been a shield maiden of Rohan, and she wants to fight, and Merry wants to fight, but everybody around them is like, just stay back, like you're not really going to be helpful, and then they end up tag teaming one of the most powerful like people ever. Like it's great because like a lot of people think it's like Éowyn does so much in that fight and she gets the kill shot, but like Merry also is like, no dude, like I'm part of this too. Like that is such a powerful moment, and it doesn't feel as forced. I know people talk about that moment where she kind of says, I am no man, and she stabs the Witch King in the face. It doesn't feel pandering. It feels like it's just a cool moment to like reveal to him and the rest of the world that she's not gonna just like sit around and be on the sidelines. It's like, get him. Like every time she stabs him, I'm like, yes, like it's so good, man. I love it so much. Are you a fan of that scene?
Yeah, it feels so good. And yeah, absolutely. I think it really, I have seen those kind of the reactions where people are like, oh, it's like you just had a woman do the thing, and it's like you are totally losing the message of what this scene means and how powerful it is. And so I think, and because it was like the early 2000s, I think like that intention wasn't even there. The intention was to reveal this huge, powerful moment where it's like, again, like, the Witch King is like wrecking house in that battle. Like he's so powerful. And so to have like this tiny force of this woman who like hasn't had the chance in battle to really show her colors, and this hobbit who, again, he's a pure one. He comes from peace and purity, to really like step into their own, I think is so powerful. It was such a cool moment. Yeah
it's just so neat. And even though it's like you kind of wish you could see that with some of the other ones, that you don't really get the kill shots on the other ring wraiths to the same extent. This one is very built up, and I think I even mentioned it in my little notes here, but I think one of the coolest things to build up to that moment is just when Gandalf and Pippin are looking over over at Mordor and Cirith Ungol and all that stuff. And he's like, he looks at Pippin after Pippin's like, we've got the White Wizard. That's got to count for something. And Gandalf's like, well, they have something that's pretty good too. And they starts talking about the Witch King, and there's like the suit up moment. He gets like the helmet and everything. And you're like, who's this guy? And you're like, oh, that's the guy who stabbed Frodo. And you start to realize, you're like, oh, this guy's pretty scary. And he is just kind of this ever looming presence on the battlefield. So when he finally shows up, and even when Theoden looks at him when it's swooping down on his fell beast, Theoden's even like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die. Like, he's like,
I think of the Witch King almost the way I think of like Bane from Batman, like kind of this silent evil powerhouse where like just the sheer sight of this individual is terror, right? And so like you remember those fight scenes between Batman and Bane, and you're like, Batman doesn't stand a chance. Like, there's no way he's going to beat Bane. And it's this, you have a similar sentiment when you see the Witch King, right? Flying around. It's like, what could possibly take this thing down? And in the end, it was the Shield Maiden and a Hobbit. So I think like that. I don't know. I don't want to call it a plot twist, but I think that moment serves the viewers so well because it's just really powerful.
Oh, totally, yeah. And it's just a cool moment, and that's what I love in big kind of fights like this, is the heroes, like the one-on-one type moments like this, because that's what obviously you remember the most. But going back to like Merry, even though I don't think it's as interesting as Pippin in this one, I think Merry gets a little more play in Two Towers, kind of with the Ents, so maybe it wasn't as big of a deal. But I like his inclusion in all of it, and he wants to fight and help his friends because he's like, well, my friends are out there fighting. Like, I love that none of the hobbits are like quitters. Like, none of them are like, well, I guess there's nothing else to do, I'm going back to the Shire. Like, they're like, no, I'm sticking it out. Like, we've been through a lot, I'm not gonna leave them, which is a great message. It's like, get after it. And man, the charge of just Rohan and like all those, oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's so good. Like, I wish, and I know it's like a tactical thing, and it's probably just a visual thing to show them. I wish they probably should have set up like 100 yards back, and they just didn't announce it, and then they just showed up, and like the orcs. I love the look on the orcs' faces though, even though they've kind of got their little like, we got the spears up kind of, and their little arrows are going, and they all start kind of backing up. They're like, guys, these guys aren't stopping. Like,
they're coming really fast,
like really fast, and I don't know if we're gonna be able to stop. And I love how quickly Uruk-hai do this a little bit too. They break rank like after they get destroyed like that, and then it's like you got to send in the Haradrim and stuff, and it's just great. But anyway, we'll save fights for a little bit later. But that's Merry, Pippin, and Gandalf. Is there anything else you want to say about those three right now?
I mean, there's a lot to say about them, but I think this is a good transition period. I think like where the action kind of shifts, it's cool because it like sets them up to have a really powerful moment, and then like you kind of get hyped about them, and then the action kind of shifts, and you're like, okay, I know we'll come back to this, and I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like such a great setup for what happens later in the film.
That's because I'm structuring this podcast like Lord of the Rings. No, I'm just kidding. The people are like, wait, what? That's right. Peter Jackson and I, we talked on the phone last night for a long time.
That's great. Awesome.
No, Congrats, I was like, do you want to be on the show? And he's like, I don't want to talk about Lord of the Rings anymore. I'd be like, oh yeah, I understand. That's fine.
That's fine.
Yeah, I'd be like, do you want to talk about The Hobbit? And he's like, no. But anyway, let's move on to another group, a trio that has just become, I think, just the bromance trio. The guys you want to hang out with, the buddies you've always wanted. We're talking about Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. I think more or less Legolas and Gimli have an established friendship at this point, even at the very end. But it's still kind of fun. They're still kind of interesting characters, but we're not really getting to like the nitty gritty. It's not like we're really diving into like why Gimli hates elves or why, Legolas might not like dwarves. They're just kind of buds at this point, but they're following Aragorn, and they're kind of like steadfast to him, not even to a fault, but just to be like, dude, wherever you go, we go. Like, you don't get it. We're going to follow you to the end. We made it through Helm's Deep together, man. Like, we're coming with you. But Aragorn, who this movie really, I think he's like the guy. It's even in the name like of the movie. Like, it's his story really, and his kind of acceptance of becoming the king of all men. And I just love it. Like, I don't know, man. I can go through little bits and pieces here and there, but like, it's just Viggo, man. He's so good. Like, really it's just everything he does. It's just spot on. And I love how he handles everything. things from just like inspiring people to kind of, you know, letting somebody down easily romantically, which he does in such a poetic way with Eowyn, where he's just kind of like, you know what, like, I get it, but it's okay. And you know, it's just like, I'm sorry, I'm kind of off the market. And just to like accepting his role as the king and doing scary, crazy things in order to save the world. Like,
totally.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. And I think, like, you know, I don't know. We look at Aragorn and we, you know, at least for me, like I saw him as the most relatable because, you know, I think especially for young men, I think like realizing like, you know, who they are and who they want to become. And I think there's so much that Aragorn struggles with that is really relatable for the viewers. I think understanding his place and his sort of his fate. I think there's like a lot of like there's a lot of messages about destiny and like, you know, him taking his rightful place in the kingdom. And so I think, you know, seeing him struggle with that while dealing with very real tangible battles and wars and stuff, I mean, like, he just remains so calm and he remains that rock and he remains that counter to people's sadness and despair. And I think, you know, I think it goes almost without saying, but like there's totally religious context within, especially Return of the King. You know, Tolkien has said, you know, Lord of the Rings is an inherently Catholic work. You know, Tolkien was a super devout Roman Catholic throughout his whole life, but you know, he never like shoves it in your face. He's never like Return of the King, you know, like Jesus, you know. And so I think like seeing Aragorn as like this, you know, humble, this humble figure, but at the same time having so much power that he's so reluctant to kind of claim as his own and take his rightful place. I think it's really interesting. I think, you know, you look at the context. I'm not a religious person, but you look at the context of religion and, you know, those like God figures that are so powerful and that are so central to a lot of religions, and their actions that are so selfless and just. And there's so much to kind of understand and appreciate as it relates to Aragorn. I think it's crazy interesting. But yeah, I mean, he has so many moments where throughout all three films, people are like, dude, you know what you are. Why don't you just accept it? And he's like, no, I'm a man. I'm corruptible. Like I you know, my ancestors messed up. I don't want to be this. I have the same blood in my veins. To the point where like he doesn't even want to touch the sword, you know, like he's so reluctant. But seeing him really come to terms with that, and like, I mean, he turns into such a badass at the end. You know what I mean? Like his character arc is just absolutely phenomenal.
Oh yeah. And I, you know, unlike the stuff you're talking about there, kind of with religion, he doesn't go around telling everybody. He's not like, I am the eventual king of all men. He's like, and like no one. It's not like the reverse where you get where it's like people are like, yeah, right, dude, like you're not that, and then he like proves it. It's just like it's quietly always there, and then he gets to see all these foils to himself where he's like, oh my gosh, he's like, we got Boromir over here who gets corrupted, we got Theoden who's all about his pride, and it's just like he's just kind of looking around and just kind of dealing with people who just like Theoden, we're just like, last I checked, it was Theoden who is, you know, king of Rohan, not Aragorn. Aragorn's like, you know, buddy, that's flipping fine. But like they start to bond, and I like that Theoden starts to accept him even more. And even in the beginning, he kind of tells Eowyn, he's like, man, you picked a good one. Like whoever you like, this guy, he seems pretty legitimate, and he might be someone to watch out for. And I love that you get the fun thing about this is there's a romance here that's been going, it's permeated the whole story, but it's not something that's happening in real time. In the fact that it's not happening with like two people right next to each other. Arwen's love for Aragorn is like the reason Middle Earth still exists, which is nuts, because she's like, hey dad, guess what? I figured something out. You didn't tell me that I was going to have a son. And he's like, I mean, like, Aragorn's still going to die. And she's like, but still. And she's like, make the sword and give it to him. And he's like, fine, because she's just like, I'm not leaving. She's like, I will die here. I will die here in my room. She almost like a pouty teenager. She's like, I'm gonna die here if you don't do something. And he's just like
stages like a sit-in.
Yeah, she says, and she's like dropping books and stuff. Like she's falling. It's like it's hurting her. Like the corruption is hurting her.
Yeah.
And Elrond's like, you know, what am I supposed to do? So he's like, you know what? I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna dress up basically like a ring wraith and try to infiltrate this camp and talk to Theoden about it. Theoden, who in Two Towers, I don't think ever would have done this. Theoden leaves his own tent, his own immaculate, beautiful tent to let Aragorn and Elrond have a conversation. I
Yeah.
thought that was huge because, like, I think about Theda being like, "Yeah, you can go talk in your own flippin' tent." Like,
Yeah, totally.
it's like Theda's just like, "I'm gonna get out of here."
He's like, I'll give you two a moment.
He's
He
like,
just
I'm
leaves.
gonna walk outside, and
Yeah.
I love that he doesn't really tell all the troops. Like, he kind of knows what's going on, but like Theda's just like, "Yep, he's just gonna go away. Like,
Yeah.
he's got to go. Don't worry
Yep.
about it." Like,
And I think like that moment where Aragorn is given the sword and kind of like his processing like what it means and the symbolism of it all, again going back to the idea of like it's inherently this Catholic work. I think that moment is so powerful. There's something I wanted to read. There's a series of letters. It's called the Letters of j.r.r. Tolkien, and basically he wrote Tolkien wrote all these letters throughout his life, kind of reflecting on his work. He would write, let's see, it says here, he would write the letters to Edith Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien and his other children. He would write to his publishers. He would write about Middle Earth, all these things. But there's one in particular where he says, this was in letter 142. There was like 300 and something
wow.
letters. Yeah, he says, the Lord of the Rings is fundamentally religious and Catholic work. Subconsciously so at first, but consciously in the revision. That is why I have not put in or have cut out practically all references to anything like religion or cults or practices in this imaginary world. For the religious elements is absorbed into the story and the symbolism. And so I think that symbolism is super palpable in that moment where Aragorn is given that sword. He kind of does become this like Jesus figure. He becomes like that. You could argue that that is the real tangible start of the return of the king, like as a concept. And so I think like him taking the blade and like holding it and really examining it, I think that's like the first time where he's like, no, the king is coming back. It's almost like this John Wick moment where he's like, yeah, I think I'm back. So it's that, I mean, like that scene just gives me chills every time. And also like, again, if you think about Arwen's father, like you really consider Elrond's journey of being like, no, like screw that guy, you're gonna come with me to the Undying Lands. And you listen here, Missy, I'm going to take away your cell phone too. He's so resistant to that romance and to that union. And then, I mean, just like, I'm not a dad and I can't put myself in those shoes, but imagine the struggle he had where he's like, man, I really love my daughter and I really want her to be happy. And now she kind of knows the truth. And so like, I mean, you kind of do see a 180 from Elrond as well, where he's like, the sword has been remade. Like, this is yours. And it pains me to say that, but like, this is yours. So like, take your place. And so, yeah, I really look at it like the start of the Return of the King.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think of that moment too, in that like Elrond is finally saying like, okay, you know what? If my daughter is going to date any mortal, maybe it's okay that it's this guy, right? And he's like, I can't get rid of him. I've tried multiple things. I basically kind of sent him on a suicide quest. I kind of sent her to go away on a boat forever. Maybe that'll work. And it's like, okay, fine. He's like, you know what? If you're going to be my son-in-law, basically, here's what you got to do. You got to be the king of men. You just got to do it. Like, don't you give me any guff. He's like, I made this super sword for you. It's like 60 feet long. Like, you got to get out there and you need to go get your own undead army. And Aragorn's just kind of like, oh man. And I love that there's that moment. Aragorn's still like, I'm going to go alone. And Legolas and Gimli are like, no, dude, what do you mean you're going to go alone? You're not going anywhere alone. And I think it's really helpful to have them along, because it would have just been weird to have Aragorn walking or like kind of sauntering through the mountains by himself and just kind of like,
totally. And like their whole journey into the mountain, like it's terrifying. It's so spooky. And like, they're completely shook. And like, I think it's like this really interesting moment. It's like the next kind of step in Aragorn's acceptance as, of himself as the king, where he's like, I got the sword. Like, I have to do this. Like, I'm here. We've come so far, kind of thing. And it's something they've never faced ghosts. Like, it's so out of left field, And so, that evolution, looking at that moment where he gets the sword as the start, the next step is him going into those mountains and being like, I got to take this next step.
Yeah, I love the lead up to the undead. There's this kind of the shadow in which they're kind of the mountains are looming, and you kind of see the king of the undead kind of down that path when Aragorn's originally looking down him. and finally seeing
Yeah.
them and seeing how kind of freaky and terrifying they are, and having Legolas kind of show off that he's like, well, normal weapons won't work in these guys, because he shoots an arrow right through the guy's head and it goes right through him, and he's just like, what you gonna do? And then Aragorn not only can block the sword of the undead guy, grabs him by the throat and like holds a sword to him. He's like, you will suffer me. He's like you're working for me now. And I kind of want to talk about this throughout the whole thing. I think the Return of the King theatrical cut works better in some ways as opposed to the extended. And it comes in right here with the undead. He's going around and he says, what say you? And he kind of says it again, and it cuts. Yeah. In this one, the dead retreat. There's like this very Peter Jackson, like, what if all the skulls rain down? And like there's this whole sequence, and they like go out to the boats, and Aragorn's like, oh, I lost the undead, but then the undead show back up, and then they go take over the boats, and there's like, you and what army? Like, that's fine, and I think it's cool for like people who I think love just seeing more of this stuff. But I get why they cut it, because later on when you see him show up, you're like, oh my gosh, like like they've got the whole ghost army, and they just come out of nowhere, and there's like, we're just gonna destroy.
They come out of like the walls of the ship. Yeah.
It's so
I think I agree. I mean, I think like this setup to the big, like, what, you know, you and what army moment is a little bit tighter. It's a little bit cleaner.
Yeah.
And it, like, I'm a sucker for hype. Like, I get hyped about anything and I love it. And so I think like setting up the hype moment for the, you know, you and what army moment is like awesome. It feels so good.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, they do it twice. That's the weird thing, because they like, it's like with the men, the Corsair ships, it's like they do that, and then they kind of do it again with the orcs. But it's way better with the orcs, because there's that one orc who's got the one skull on his head that's like strapped to him, who you've seen before, and he's angry that the Corsair ships are just getting there, and it's just like, oh my gosh. And then you get Gimli's little funny line about may the best dwarf win, which I always think is like kind of corny, but I'm like, maybe Gimli's like, all right, let's just like, he's like kind of accepted Legolas to be like, you're one of my kind now.
And like when he like when they all jump out off like the edge of the boat, it's so badass. It just feels so good. And like, because at that point, you know that he has the army. Like, you're kind of like, oh, the army's, he's ready to like wreck house. But like that moment where they come out and they're like, what's up, guys? You want to fight? And then, you know, it really builds that moment so well.
It's like Infinity War, where Thor, Rocket, and Groot, the only three of them show up, and it feels like a whole army showed up, and it's just the three of them, but it's just Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. But even though if they didn't have that army, that group that's sitting at the shore, I still feel like those three boys would have a decent chance. I was like, those guys are terrifying. Like, they kill.
The orc was absolutely screwed.
Yeah, it's just like, you see those guys, you're like, oh my god. Like, you just see Legolas, I'd be like, we're all screwed. He's gonna do it really cool, but he's gonna kill every last one. And why is that guy, who's that guy with the big sword? They'd be like, oh, no, he's got a ghost army now. And I love how the ghosts, they attack. Like, when you see him attack an Oliphant later on, they're kind of like this, like a wave almost, that they just kind of like are crawling up, and they're just like that.
It's very like World War Z, you know, it has that like horde mentality. And I think like that imagery is so important, because it really, I don't know, it really like solidifies the point that like Aragorn has control over them. Like Aragorn is like their leader right now. And it's just like, again, from so little, from such despair comes such power, you know, that massive, the wave of this ghost army just kind of crashing through everybody like water. I think it's just like, no, these guys are powerful, and they've just now come to terms with how much power they really have.
Oh, totally. I kind of like to think of, I don't know if he's like controlling them telepathically, or he kind of told them, he's like, all right, so here's who you're going to focus. You're going to focus like certain guys, but orcs and stuff. And I would just love to see like a shot back to Gandalf and Pippin, and like the door stops like shaking, and then they like open it up, and it's just like everybody's dead, and there's just like a bunch of like ghosts standing there. They're just like, well, and Gandalf's just like, happened? Like, because Gandalf, the next time you see him, he's in Pelennor Fields looking back at Minas Tirith, and he's just kind of like, so he finally did it. Like, I'm like, how did you get out there, Gandalf? Like, he's just kind of walking around the battlefield, but it's still, Aragorn's out there, he's fighting, he's not like, just go do this for me. And there's a little extended bit where, I think it's Gothmog, the pink orc, the guy with the weird arm, he was like trying to kill Éowyn for a bit, and then Aragorn and Gimli, and it would have been even better if Legolas, I don't think he gets a shot in, but they come over, Aragorn like slices him, Gimli like hits him twice on the way through, like he's nothing, and they just destroy him, and it's like, oh, that's the leader of the orcs who just
Right.
got
He just gets absolutely fried.
destroyed.
Yeah.
It's just so nice because like that fight goes on for a bit and there's these kind of like fun back and forths, but then when the dead
Yep.
show up, it's just like we're done. We're done here. And he could have easily told them like, yeah, you know what, like I said I'd release you, but could you just go take care of like Sauron? But he lets them go. Like even Gimli's like the audience right there. Gimli's like, hey man, like you should probably keep these guys around. They're pretty good in a pinch. And Aragorn's like, nope, I'm a man of my word. I'm not going to let power corrupt me. I'm just going to be like, and you may go. And it's like, oh, good on you, Aragorn. What a guy, right? Like, because that would have been such a sad ending if it would have just been like, yeah, just go flood the Black Gate and we'll be done with it. Like, it wouldn't have felt meaningful. But yeah, Aragorn, incredible. I love him. And his moment, I think his greatest moment, one of his greatest moments, getting crowned at the end and kind of all the good things happening. Arwen comes back and you see kind of Faramir and Eowyn are kind of a thing that's kind of the extended edition stuff. And you see that all of them there and he finally shows up and sees, the four hobbits. And a moment that got me when I was younger, moment still gets me, where they're all kind of bowing to him, the new king, and he's just kind of like, my friends, you bow to no one. And the king of all men and everyone bow to these four little hobbits.
It's
and
so good.
It's like showing that like even the smallest can be the tallest, it's just so, oh my, like, and the music swells. And it's like the last time you see a lot of the Fellowship on Minas Tirith, and you're just like, it's just like it's heartbreaking, but it's beautiful, and it's like, oh, forget.
And it's I think when you look at Aragorn and he says that, you bow to no one line, I think it's so genuine. Like I believe it like 100%. Like it didn't feel like this BS movie moment where it was like, no, you guys are the real kings. Like it felt so genuine and real. And like also like the scale of how many people were there and how everybody kind of bows, and it's just so powerful. It's one of my favorite moments of the whole trilogy.
Yeah, it's crippling in how good it is, and he looks like he's got the full armor on. He's got the crown, crowned by Gandalf and stuff. He's singing a little song. He's being almost he's like magnanimous. He's like a politician. He's like, let's rebuild this world together. And everybody's like, yeah. They're like the Ghost Army guys got a good point. And they're like, anybody's better than Denethor at this point. So I was like, man, it's just so cool to watch the arc of a character like that who started off as Strider, as a dude smoking a pipe, sitting in a bar in Bree.
Yep.
And now he's like, like prancing pony no more. Like
totally. Like, and it's like, I don't know, man. Like you look at the story arcs of so many characters, and like you could make an argument that like if you watch all three movies or you read all three books, you could be like, oh, the trilogy is about Frodo. But you can make a just as strong argument. You'd be like, no, the trilogy is actually about Gollum. And then you'd be like, well, actually, the trilogy is really about Aragorn. And it's like, wow, like there's so many important moments. And I don't think there is a singular character that is responsible, solely for, their ultimate success. I think it's so split, and it's so, and I think that kind of harkens back to the fact that they're a fellowship. They are a team, where like the story of Lord of the Rings isn't about any one individual. It's about the union of those individuals.
Yeah.
And you see that sentiment so many times throughout the films.
Yeah, intertwining. It's so good. I know the denouement for this film is pretty long. I kind of wish there was just like another 20 minutes of just like the Fellowship hanging out and just being like, oh my gosh, like, dude, like, what have you been up to? And be like, you guys will not believe the crazy stuff I've been doing. And they'd be like, oh man, you were there? How did you get past him? Be like, I don't know. Like
it's kind of just worked out.
Yeah, it worked out really nicely. Well, that transitions really well into talking about our last trio here. In a sense, we're talking about Sam, Frodo, and Gollum. I want to start with a little bit of a different pick, maybe. Let's start with Gollum Smeagol. The first film, Fellowship, opens up. It's this crazy, like, backstory. Cate Blanchett's talking, say Galadriel, and it's like showing all the stuff that's happened, leading up to this.
Yeah.
This movie starts with two riverfolk, Deagle and Smeagol, who are fishing. And it's so small, and I think it just goes to show how, like, big Lord of the Rings can be, but then also how intimate it can be as well. Sure. And, like, you wouldn't think this movie would start off like that, because it's not really, like, if you started watching Lord of the Rings and started with this, you'd be like, this is kind of weird. It's like two guys fishing and one kills the other one. But it's so significant because you've started to, this character now, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is the guy. This is him before the ring.
Yep.
And I think that sequence is really good. Some of the CG looks a little weird when like the Deagle's getting pulled by the fish, but besides
Yeah,
that, I
yeah.
love that he's the one who gets it, because I think in Fellowship, everybody thinks it's Smeagol who grabs it from the water, like he
Right.
picks it up from the water, but it's actually Deagle. And that kind of, from right there, you start to see like, oh, what the power of this thing is, especially to Smeagol, like how like it corrupts him so quickly, like
Yeah,
it's
yeah, and
devastating.
again, like just hammering that message home that and like I said in the Two Towers show, Tolkien thinks he always thought that everybody is inherently good until they're corrupted, and so I think like what a perfect like that could just be like a short film
Yeah,
almost, right? Like it has like all the parts of a story, it has like the kind of setting the stage. It introduces a character, it introduces a conflict, and it peaks when Smeagol kills Deagle. And so, you know, I think if you look at that almost like a short film, you really get the sense of what the trilogy is about and the messages that Tolkien wanted to send in his work and Peter Jackson wanted to illustrate in his films, where it's like, these hobbits were good. They were pure people. They were pure, beings until they were faced with this corruptible, this corruption. And the fact that the ring was like dormant for so long, it was just sitting in the bottom of a stream. You know what I mean? Like this hugely, massively powerful relic of eons past, it just sat there until it found this host. You know what I mean? And I think it's also really cool. A lot of the stories of that time, the the good guys go on this journey to get the treasure, and then when they get the treasure and they bring it home, they win. But in the Lord of the Rings, and you see so much of it in the beginnings of the Deagle and Smeagol kind of storyline, the treasure is the evil. And so it's not about going to retrieve the treasure, it's about already having that treasure, already having that power, and trying to get rid of it. Which is like, it turns the whole hero story on its head. It totally like turns everything backwards. And I can't think of many stories of that time or before. I think about Beowulf being such an inspiration for Tolkien's work. I can't think of a lot of stories that did anything similar. It was always about like going to get the dragon and killing it, or going to get the treasure and taking it home, not having the treasure and having to destroy it.
Oh, totally. And kind of seeing like the effect it has. And I think there's kind of an assumption there where kind of Smeagol's talking about what happened to him after he got the treasure, and
Yeah.
kind of saying he's like, they called us a murderer and stuff. I wonder if there was like a trial, or if they're just like, we found that you killed Deagle, and they like kind of, they throw him out and he's kind of like screaming on the rocks, and then like you
Yeah.
just see him kind of retreat in his transformation into this thing, and just like his life revolving solely around this, because like he's, in essence, he's content. Like
Yep.
his life is completely ruined, but he has what he wants, even though he didn't know he wanted it. And now like his life
Right.
just revolves around having this thing. Like that's all it
Totally.
is. That's all it
Yeah.
is. Like,
And you look at characters in movies or shows or books that are like, you look at addiction, right? Like, again, I recently watched Breaking Bad, and so you see a lot of characters that are addicted to methamphetamine, and their life is in shambles. But as long as they have that power, that what we as the viewers see as evil and corruption and bad for you, but what they see as what they want the most, they're content. They could live in the completely busted up apartment and be like skinny and missing teeth, but they have what they want.
yeah.
And so I think like you can kind of make a lot of ties to like addiction, like substance abuse kind of thing with Gollum, and seeing his transformation into Gollum from Smeagol, I think is like really, really powerful. I feel like, I don't know, like as a kid in like fourth or fifth grade, like throughout all those like dare lessons, I
Yeah.
feel like they could have just shown like a clip of like Smeagol turning into Gollum, being like, "This is what happens if you smoke cigarettes,"
Yeah,
and I'd be
exactly.
like, "That's terrifying. I'm never gonna smoke cigarettes."
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's such a cool, getting. It's weird being in the third film and getting so much backstory of how the ring came into this part of the third age. It's super. It's like really interesting and crazy.
Yeah, well, it reinforces the tragedy that we get in Two Towers, where you have Gollum / Smeagol, and then Smeagol takes over for a long time, and then
Yep.
you get this kind of cliffhanger, like, oh, Gollum's going to try to kill these guys, but then you get to see Smeagol again, and you're like, oh no. So that way, later on, when he has those moments with Frodo, where he's like, it's me, it's Smeagol, and Frodo's kind of like, okay, I guess it's cool, but then doesn't trust him. Which, Manny, again, this has happened now. I've reinforced my theory. If you get thrown off a cliff in Lord of the Rings, you come back more powerful. However,
True.
if there's fire involved, I'm looking at you, Denethor and Gollum, you don't come back more powerful.
Yeah.
But Gollum gets thrown off, and you're like, he must be gone. And I remember seeing it the first time, and I was like, there's no way that guy's done. I was like,
Right.
there's no way.
Yeah.
But kind of leading him into Frodo into Shelob's lair, and that kind of like his plan coming to fruition. And it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
and then even there's a moment where Gollum kind of sees Shelob, and he's like, oh man, I gotta get out of here too.
Yeah.
Like he's like, this is scary. But I I just think it's so great that like you get that full kind of return, and there's even a little extra line at the end. That's the extended edition where Frodo says to like Gollum as he's getting choked, he's like, "I thought you said that was Smeagol," and he says Smeagol lied. Like that's cut out
Yeah.
of the theatrical version, and I was like, I can see why they did it, but at the same time, it's pretty good. Where it's like, oh my god, like
Yeah.
even Smeagol is kind of like the good part of him is corrupted now. It's like
Totally.
oh
Yeah.
no,
And
like,
I think it's super interesting, and this might be segueing into another part of that trio. It's super interesting the role that Gollum plays to get in between Frodo and Sam. Like we see a bunch of that in the Two Towers, but we really see it take form in Return of the King, where and again, you could say that the trilogy is about Sam. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like there's so much there, but the way that Gollum wedges himself so cunningly between Frodo and Sam is really scary. There were so many moments where I was like, Frodo, come on, man. Like you got to see through this, but he's corrupted too. He's being challenged mentally and emotionally. And so like, he can't see the purity that is Sam. And Sam remains so pure. He really is the part of the Shire that stayed the Shire throughout, the journey. I think there's an argument to be made that when the hobbits come back to the Shire afterwards, they're all changed and the Shire is different. And, there's a conversation with, I think it was Frodo and Sam where Frodo's like, no, like it's not going to be the same Shire. We're not going to be the same people. But, at least all the way to Mount Doom, Sam was pure as heck. Like he was just, he was that, he was like the real hero, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and again, you could say that about like 8 different characters, but the way that Gollum uses his strengths, which are deception and like stealth and all this, like he really kind of like picks apart, like just it was like death by a thousand cuts. Like he really just picks apart Frodo and Sam and gets in between them in like a really intense way.
Yeah.
And seeing that friendship and that love between those two being challenged and almost, I mean, like pretty much being broken. Like at the end, like Frodo is like kind of done, but you can't blame him. I mean, he's been carrying the ring and dealing with Gollum the whole time. But yeah, you really got to feel for Sam, the way Gollum totally toys with their relationship.
Oh, and I'm glad you brought him up because that's who I was going to talk about next. So clearly, we're on the same wavelength.
Yeah.
Samwise Gamgee, the unsung hero of it all, really, maybe even not unsung. I think the great thing about Sam, and you said it so well, like his character arc isn't as substantial as others. He just becomes more courageous, but he still retains who he is. Sam didn't really need to change much from the beginning to the end. Like there's not much that Sam needed to kind of fix, except like he gets a little more courage so he can go, ask Rosie out.
Sure.
That's kind of his thing, right? But like it's just like I am just the rock and I will do whatever, and my love for my friend here is kind of turning to anger because this other guy he's basically, talking about the addiction. It's like if you're best friends with somebody and this best friend got a new friend who was really into drugs, and this guy was like, oh, yeah, you know what? Like, we're gonna get him into drugs too, and he's like, no, dude, like, you can't. Like, I don't want you to look at that. Look at him. Look at him for like 1 second. He's a bad guy. Like, look at him. He's trying to kill us.
Than this,
yeah,
man.
and it's just like, and Frodo's just kind of like, I don't really know who to trust. And there's that moment where Gollum's like, soon he's gonna ask for the ring, and Frodo's kind of like, how dare he do that type of thing, and then he does, and then Frodo's like, dude, you gotta go. Like the fact that he even thought that Sam. I think it's kind of the constant joke of Gollum calling him Fat Hobbit. Yeah. But like the joke of like, oh, he ate all the bread. Like Sam would die before he ever ate all the bread. But like Frodo at that point, like running on no sleep and everything, like at the beginning of Fellowship, he'd be like, yeah, no way. But at the end of Return of the King, I could see where he's like, maybe you're right. He's like, maybe you got to get out of here, buddy. Like you're not helping us anymore. It's like, crazy.
It's so sad. Like so sad. And I mean, like, watching Sam like tear up and cry after Frodo would like get lost, like, man, that hurts, and it just kills me every single time. And there's a similar moment between Gandalf and Bilbo where Gandalf is like, give me the ring in the Fellowship, when he's like, give me the ring before you leave, like you can't take it with you. And Bill was like, oh, you're trying to rob me. And he kind of goes into like full wizard god mode. And he's like,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you. There's a lot of that same thing with Frodo and Sam, where when Sam asks for the ring, it's coming from a place of love and support. It's not, he doesn't want to rob him. And I would, I'd be super interested in this alternate universe where either Sam's the one who's with the ring throughout the whole journey, or in that moment, Frodo gives Sam the ring. Like how Sam would kind of handle that, because again, it's the embodiment of corruption and evil. But yeah, man, like, I think a lot about the moment in the Fellowship where Sam and Frodo are just starting their journey, and they get to this moment, and Sam pauses, and he's like, if I step one more foot, this is the furthest away from the Shire I will have ever been. And then you look at him in the Return of the King, and you're like, wow, dude, like you've done some amazing stuff.
Oh,
like,
totally.
you've come so far.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. But it's like he's retained who he is like the whole time. Like he's not like, well, now I'm the coolest hobbit that's ever been. He's like, no, he's like, I'm here for Mr. Frodo. And that great moment talking about like a role reversal where Sam is like, I thought you were dead, when he finds him, like kind of all strapped up in webs. And then eventually in like the kind of the orc palace, which name I'm blanking on right now. Dol
Yep.
Hey, where did that come from? Anyway, and he's kind of like, he's gonna give the ring back, and you kind of hear like the Sauron kind of weird like voice and noise and stuff. And I think the thought for some is that like Sam is starting to become like addicted to the ring, and maybe there's some truth to that. But I also think it's like he's looking at his friend, and his friend's like, give me the ring, Sam. You can't do this. I need it. Give me the ring. And he's like, I don't know. Like, I feel like this is kind of a bad thing. And then he relents eventually, but kind of reluctantly. He's like, okay, you can have it. Like,
and I think because like Sam is so pure in so many ways, and I think his like perspective, the lens through which he views Frodo is very pure as well. And so he sees things almost to a fault, very black and white. And I think he's like, ring is bad, Gollum bad, Frodo good, and we have this journey that we need to complete. And so like, I think, he is like almost the Aragorn of that little universe between Sam, Frodo, and Gollum, where he's the rock and he balances Frodo out and he supports Frodo. And he's almost like the lens through which we see the movie too, because we're seeing all of Gollum's trickery. We know that Gollum's tricking Frodo. We know that he, threw the bread off the cliff, and that, all these things. And so does Sam. And Sam sees all those things too. And so like, it gives Sam this almost like omniscient view of what's going on, which makes us as the viewers really sympathetic and empathetic towards him, because we're like, we know what's going on. Sam knows what's going on. Frodo is the only one who doesn't know what's going on. And it sucks because like, he can't get to a place where he can rely on Sam effectively.
Yeah, well, he's just so, like you said before, he's so corrupted, and he just he can't see it for what it is anymore.
Exactly.
And it's fun too later on, because there's a little bit of a flip between Frodo and Sam, where in the beginning, Frodo and Sam talking about the food, and Sam's like, well, we're gonna have enough. And Frodo's like, for what? And he's like, oh, food for the return journey. And then at the end, they're kind of talking, and Frodo's like, I'm not sure. He's like, I think we should hopefully have enough like water or whatever for the return journey. And Sam's just like, I don't think there's going to be a return journey, Mr. Frodo. Like that moment, you're like, whoa, Sam, like, are you kind of like becoming irrational?
Real dark, dude.
Like he's starting to accept things, because Sam has done some things. And kind of like when Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli jump out of that ship, when Sam shows up with Sting in hand, a Light of Elendil in the other, and they play the little version of Fellowship, or like the Fellowship score. And he's like, get away from him, you filth. And he goes to fight Shelob. He goes to fight a giant spider. And you're like, how are you going to do this, Sam? And looking back at it, I'm like, he kind of bumbles his way through it. He's just trying to survive. Like, Sam doesn't want to go he's not trying to like murder this thing. He's just trying to save Frodo, which is great. Yeah. Because like, he's not like, I'm going to go in and like murder this thing. But he, there's a few moments in there where you're like, wow, like Sam, that a boy. Like, he's in there. He's scrappy. You're like, good on you, Sam. Like, totally get after him. Oh my gosh. And I love that he gets the victory, and then he's like, oh my gosh, I still lost Frodo. And in that moment, they don't show it to you, but like, he takes the ring, and he's like, oh wait, Frodo might not be dead, because like the orcs are like, he's not dead, let's take him back to the tower. And he's like, oh man, he's like, come on. I love that whole bit. I think it's good.
It's really great. And like, just the whole all of the scenes that involve like Gollum and Shelob and Sam and Frodo, like like, I don't know, man. Like the first time I saw it, I totally thought Sam was gonna be toast. Like I was like, oh my god, this is where Sam dies. This is the most tragic thing ever. But you really do get to see like the true colors of a lot of those characters, and I think the true color of Gollum being like, oh, I'm gonna lead him through this cave, and it's obviously a trap, and the true color of Frodo, which is like, I'm super corrupted and I'm just going to believe Gollum blindly. And, the true colors of Sam, which is like, I'm here to help my friend and save him. It really reinforces, who they are at their like, most deep level.
Yeah. Oh, and it's great to see that no matter what, after when Sam sees the bread, I think in that moment, he's like, nope, everything's been confirmed. Everything I think is right is right. Everything that's wrong is wrong. And when he shows back up, it didn't matter what he was going to come in contact with. It could have been like a ton of orcs or, Sauron himself. He would have been like, I'm going to get Frodo back. Yeah, and then like that just transfers even more like the guilt of not saving him to like basically like go into this place full of orcs and uruks or whatever. And thankfully there's a little civil war that starts up because, Sam kind of gets in because of it, but like him fighting his way and him just like killing without remorse, like he's just like, I'm just gonna take everybody on, and taking out like the main dude, just like stabbing him in the back, who's just like, Sam's not in it for honor anymore. He's like, I'm gonna save Frodo, and that's all that matters. Like, it's so good. It's
and also I think his acceptance of Frodo's apology is so important, because like, I don't know, man. Like if I, like to your analogy, if I had a friend who started like, dating somebody who's super into drugs, and then that friend was like, I don't want you to be my friend anymore, Manny. And I was like, okay, like you're obviously like being corrupted by this other person. And then like a year down the line, they're like, hey man, I really messed up. I don't know if I would be like, it's all right, man. We're friends and I forgive you. I'd be like, you were an asshole.
Yeah,
like
exactly,
I would be really upset. And so I think Sam's acceptance of Frodo's apology and Frodo's sort of like return to grace is super important, because Sam is like, look, like, I know you're corrupted and I know you're dealing with so much. And so like, it's cool, man. Like, I understand why you did it. Like, imagine having that level of empathy. It's ludicrous.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also sets it up perfectly for the climax, which I think is the greatest climactic moment of any film franchise, almost any piece of media I've ever seen in my whole life. The music and everything, which we'll probably get to, but it's so good. But you get to this point where it's this fever pitch, and it's like Sam and Frodo they're almost there. They can see, like, they're like, oh my gosh, Mount Doom's right here. And then freaking Gollum shows back up, and it's like, come on, dude. Yeah. Like, it's like, why do you keep showing up? And they kind of fight him off, and you finally see Frodo standing where Elrond was standing, weirdly, and flipping the spots there with Isildur and Sam. And Sam's just like, okay, well, Frodo, where are you? And Frodo's like, I'm here, Sam. And Sam's like, dude, what are you waiting for? And Frodo's just kind of looking at it, and there's just the moment of like the pure corruption finally taking over, this last gasp, and that moment too where Frodo just looks at Sam and he says like, the ring is mine, and just it's just like, oh no, like this is the worst possible thing to happen right now. It's like
in that moment, corruption wins.
Yeah, totally.
Like, the good guys lost, and like if you look at the way the ring eventually ends up in the fires of Mount Doom, the good guys didn't actually win. The good guys lost for sure. You know, and so like, man, what a moment of like, you hit that peak of like, oh my God, he's going to throw the ring in the fire. And then you have this turnaround where it's like, no, like corruption wins in the end. It's such a heartbreaking turnaround. And to see again, like, we're seeing it through the same lens that Sam's seeing it. We understand the stakes. We are pure as viewers because we don't have the ring.
Yeah.
And Sam is watching his like best friend whom he loves dearly lose, you know? It's just a gut-wrenching turnaround there. Yeah.
Sean Astin's performance too in that no is probably one of the best no's I've ever seen, where he's just like, no, he's like, oh my, like what? And then of course Gollum shows back up, and remember, like we said before, you get stronger in Lord of the Rings if you fall off a cliff and come back.
Yeah.
And he can sense invisibility, like he's watching the footprints and stuff, and he kind of jumps into that fight. And I love that at the end, we're talking about the addiction and the corruption. It's like two addicts fighting over
like a little bit of drugs.
Yeah, a little bit of drugs. And they're like, I'm going to kill you for this. And they're like literally going to kill each other for it. And it's like, and Sam can't be part of it because he's got knocked out or whatever. And Frodo just like falls off the edge. And then you get that shot of Gollum, who in that moment is like, my whole life has just led back to this moment. And he does not even care. Like, he's in lava. Like, he's dying. And he's just like, I got
Yeah.
you. Like,
He has
it's
that
like,
moment where I think he like kind of catches it like midair,
yeah,
and he's like, and for like a split second, like he's just, it's just bliss, you know. He's like, I finally have it back. And again, it's like the corruption wins. Granted, the corruption kind of screwed itself because that's how the ring got destroyed. But it's just like this amazing moment where like all of these interlocking storylines are coming to this huge peak. And yeah, man, it's so powerful. Like everything that goes down in that scene, and like you're being distracted kind of by the fighting, and like Frodo's invisible, but you see his footprints, and then you see Gollum jump on him, and the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, "What? You're gonna fall! Watch out!"
exactly, yeah.
And then Gollum bites his finger off, and
Oh,
and so like there's all these things that are happening and pushing and pulling in every which way, and then yeah, it all comes down to that fall, and then the ring is no more, and it's just like, what even happened? It's like watching the craziest ending to like the craziest sports event where like somebody like bobbles the ball and somebody catches it and trips, and then the ball slips out again and
yeah,
somebody else picks it up. Like
dude,
it's just like this
so good.
crazy sequence of events, that like, man, such a powerful scene.
Yeah, and not to mention it's intercut with the first time we watch Aragorn start to lose because he's like losing to a troll because he's like
Right.
pinned underneath the foot of a troll. Legolas is like trying to get to him, but he just can't do it. And I
Yep.
know in like the original version they talked about maybe making that like a version or like actually Sauron coming out and like beating up
Yep.
like Aragorn. I was just like,
Yep.
that would have been kind of strange. It would have been kind
For
of
sure.
cool, but it would have been it's kind of strange. And it's like all of this stuff's happening at once. The Eagles have shown up and they're fighting the Fell
Yeah.
Beasts in the ring race, and you're like, oh my god! Like,
Yeah.
like it's all happening. Right? Like if the Ents would have dropped from the sky, I think that's the only
Yeah.
way it would have gotten
On
even
like
crazier.
helicopters.
Yeah, just,
Like,
yeah, just
yeah.
drop it in. But it's so good. And
Yep.
it's I don't know how you make it any better. And I think the setup obviously throughout all of these to get to this point, and it's all about kind of the friendships and the emotion behind it. And
Yeah.
again, back to Aragorn, he sees Sauron at the Black Gate and turns around and he just says for Frodo, like he's
Yeah.
never forgotten what he's doing this for, and he's like
Exactly.
the last ditch effort, and all of them just trying to like kind of rely on each other, just believing in the fellowship. Like
There is that moment at the Black Gate in the extended version where the mouth of Sauron comes out,
very good.
and I love that scene so much. I rewatched it this morning just to like refresh my memory, and like I don't know, like there's something really intense about the accent that the mouth of Sauron has.
Yes.
Like if I were to guess, I'd be like, is that actor like Eastern European? Like
Yeah,
is he
yeah.
Romanian? Like that, and it's so out of nowhere because you really don't get accents other than like British,
Yeah,
like
the
an
orcs are
English
like British
accent.
even. Yeah.
Exactly. And so you get this like crazy accent, and the makeup and the teeth are so creepy. And he throws the mithril chainmail, and he's like, we tortured Frodo. And he says something like, it's amazing how someone so small can endure so much torture. And like Gandalf is like tearing up, and they're like, oh my God, like they got Frodo. But then like in your mind, you're like, well, if they got Frodo, they'd have the ring. So like they've got to connect some of those dots, and then Aragorn just lobs off his head, and he's like, I don't believe it. Let's fight,
Yeah.
Such a powerful moment, and such a cool, I think it's also just a really cool look into like the mechanics of Sauron and how he literally speaks through this mouth of Sauron. It's a cool scene.
Yeah, I think it's good. For some odd reason, though, maybe just because I'm so used to watching the theatrical versions and I kind of see
Yeah.
when it's different, it always feels like, and maybe not so much with that scene, but other scenes that are added on,
Sure.
they do feel like they're from a different movie, or there's like a different feeling
Yep.
or vibe to them. And I like that thing with the Mouth of Sauron, because I think of the theatrical cut, they kind of like go up to the gate, and then it's like, may the Lord of the Black Light come forth, and then they like start opening up the gate, and they're like, all right, let's just turn around and go back to to the group. So I do enjoy that too, and like talking like you said, his trickery, which is kind of another like last like desperate Hail Mary to be like, all right, if we convince them and break their will to think that we got the ring, they might just be like, all right, we're out.
See you later.
Like
Yeah.
I'm kind of getting out of here.
Totally.
But it doesn't work because Aragorn, again, the Rock, he's just like, I'm kind of done with this conversation, honestly.
Yeah.
And he's just like, whoop, like
Just chop his head right
It's
off.
just
And
so
I think just like the imagery of the mouth of Sauron, you don't see any of his face except for his mouth. Like he's just the mouthpiece to Sauron, right?
Yeah.
And so, I feel like that's the moment where you really like, for lack of a better way to put it, like that's pretty much Sauron. Like you get to see Big Bad right there. And I think you get a much better look at Sauron in the Hobbit films, but they come face to face with essentially the largest evil that they could possibly face. But again, like you said, like Aragorn just being that rock and being like, we have a mission, we have a vision of why we're fighting, and we got to stick to it, kind of thing. Super important. Important.
Yeah, it's great, and it's funny too because you look back at that, and it wasn't like they cut costs with the Mouth of Sauron. They just decided to take the scene out. But when you look at it, you're like, wow, this is pretty weird. This is pretty freaky. Like it's really good makeup. It looks great. It's so funny because this was at a time when they kind of put practical stuff over anything else. Yep. It's like a horse that they put in like tons of crazy armor.
Yeah.
But, it's just a horse that's just like, all right, we're going out here.
The horse is like, I'm so tired. I'm carrying so much armor on my back.
I love it. I was like, oh, that horse. And I like to think there's like 3 horses that the bad guys have, or I guess there's a few more because the ring wraiths have a couple, but it's you're like, oh, these are the only ones we have. Like he didn't come out on a warg, which is fun too, because you see that Gothmog, the leader of like the army, he has one of those wargs, like from almost looks like Isengard warg, and you're like,
exactly,
how did you got one of those? And you see it like fighting later on.
You got to imagine too that like they still have to like feed the horses like apples and
stuff.
Like,
they're like, all right,
oh, that's a good girl. Yeah, okay, now let's go kill some hobbits. Like
exactly.
Yeah, it is kind of funny that they're just like, yeah, these are just horses that we put metal on.
Yeah. There's also that scene too where Frodo and Sam like don the kind of like the orc armor and stuff, and they get kind of shuffled in amongst all those orcs, and it is a very like kind of nothing happens scenes. But I think of like all the like the extras and all the like the look of all these guys that they did up, and there's that crazy kind of bald orc who's checking everybody, and it's like, wow, like there's a lot here that they're just like, get it out. It's like, oh yeah, okay. It's like,
for sure.
It's like, I understand. Also, along with like the Eowyn we talked about before, Eowyn and Faramir scenes, they kind of just axe all that out. There's like barely even a meeting between them. He just kind of is like a dude who's in the hospital ward with her, just smiling at her, and they're just like, we should be together. And it's like, oh, good.
Yeah. And then like at the end where they do like the you bow to no one scene, they're like standing next to each other, and like if you didn't see the previous scene, you're like, are they a thing? Like did they start dating? Like what's happening right now?
Yeah, and it's really weird because I forgot that like they bring Eowyn to get like treated in the medical because like Aramir thinks she's dead on the battlefield, and he's like freaking out, and I thought he was freaking out over Theoden, but it's not. And then it's like, I feel like Aragorn's healing is a lot of just like, I'm just gonna kind of like almost Gandalf, like he puts his hand like on your head, and he's kind of like, you should be okay. Like
like and I think that's like an important thing because like he, his relationship with Elrond, like I think Aragorn gets a lot of brownie points from Elrond because he's like super familiar with like the elven culture and the language. He can speak it and he understands their customs and their traditions, and so man, he's such a powerful character. Like he's like this super cultured individual who like understands like just like the balance of the world, and he has these really poetic worldviews and respect for different cultures, and so he's almost like this mystical being where he's able to be like, I'm gonna do some elf stuff. I learned this when I was a foreign exchange student in college.
Exactly,
and, and so he's such a great character.
I'm singing elven songs when I become a king for the kingdom of men, and most of the men are like, this sounds really nice. I have no idea what he's talking about. I forgot about this until this time. I didn't realize in the past, maybe I'm just dumb or just ignorant, but like the flowering tree, they shoot a moment of it, the White Tree of Gondor, like showing a flower. I don't remember if that's a theatrical cut, but then at the end, there's like, it's during his coronation, and like it's all flowered, and that's where the petals are coming from. I was like, oh, that's such a great like little like, it's just like a tiny bit of like what Lord of the Rings magic is. It's not like they're all casting fireballs all the time, even though we get a little bit of that from Saruman. It's just like, oh, like the tree will bloom again when the king returns, and it's like, there it is, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Like,
and there's all the like, man, I mean, Tolkien is such a master at his craft. Like he created full languages with like conjugations and like different like adjectives, like a fully like speakable language. That is lunacy. That's absolutely insane. And like, he has such a respect for different cultures and different, very similar to Aragorn. Like he's a super cultured individual. I was listening to this podcast about him, and he said that when he was a kid, he was supposed to be learning English and French, and he would study Latin. And he was like, that was naughty. And I thought it was so funny because like, when I was in high school, I was like playing, GameCube or whatever. That's what I did to like, break the rules. And he wouldn't like, Tolkien's mom was like, you better be learning your English and French. And he's like, I'm learning Latin, mom,
Yeah.
get away from it, And so like, I think like, so much of that, sort of like you said, Middle Earth magic, where it's like the tree will bloom when the king returns, like those sort of things are just like these little bits and pieces that Tolkien just put into the work. And huge credit to Peter Jackson for like just drowning himself in Tolkien's life and understanding like, obviously Christopher Tolkien's super close. I think Christopher Tolkien died a handful of years ago, but I would say like in terms of the people who know Tolkien's work the best, it goes like Tolkien, Christopher Tolkien, Peter Jackson. Like Peter Jackson knows his stuff. He did his homework so hard and really brought to life the vision that was Middle Earth.
Yeah, oh, totally. And it comes through just because, and again, this might be one of the times for me personally, just as a consumer of different types of media, where the film adaptation of a thing transcends the book, just because I can't read those books without thinking about this stuff.
Totally.
It's just like they nailed it. And and it's nice because sometimes the pages are too descriptive and I'm just like, oh, I just want to know what this tree looks like or this setting looks like. And the movie's like, yeah, we got you. Like, here's what Rivendell looks like from our point of view. And I'm like, it's perfect. And they're like, thank you. We tried really hard. It's like, and good job.
I think I mentioned in the last show, I watched the movies before I read the books. And then I got the books for Christmas and I read them a billion times. But it was really nice to have that reference point where like when I read Tolkien describing what Mirkwood looks like, I have the image in my head. Or if if I'm reading a battle scene where Aragorn is doing all these awesome, fight moves, I'm like, I see Vigo in my head. And so I don't know, it's interesting. Like I have these conversations with friends where I'm like, for you, I don't know, for example, you look at the Marvel video games, right? You see a Captain America, you see a Tony Stark, and they're not Robert Downey Jr. and they're not Chris Evans. But like for our generation, like Captain America is Chris Evans and no one else. You know what I mean? Iron Man will always be Robert Downey Jr. And so, I have like some Lord of the Rings board games and or the card video game, and I see these depictions of the characters. I'm like, that's not Aragorn, that's not Viggo Mortensen. You know what I mean? And so, but it was so nice to just have that reference point. It really brought to life the worlds that I was reading. I think honestly, I would probably have a much harder time as a fourth or fifth grader when I first read it if I just read the books first, because I would have to really work so hard, because like you said, the books are so descriptive. It would be so much work to like build these visions in my head as I'm reading. Whereas, having a near perfect visualization of Tolkien's world that Peter Jackson built for us, having that in my head, it made the books totally come to life.
Yeah. The only thing I can compare it to closely, and maybe did it last time too, but it's like Harry Potter, and those books, I was reading them as the movies kind of were coming out too.
Yeah.
But the way I read those books and thought about them, the movies did such a good job translating that information that I was like, yep, this is pretty much exactly what I would picture for the most part, for the settings, maybe not so much with the characters. But again, with Lord of the Rings, I was like, this is just, it's such a different ball game. It's such a different ball game, even though a lot of people like to compare the two. But it's just, man, I'm just very happy that the movies exist, and there's extended versions of them if you want that. Like there's stuff like we didn't talk about it earlier, but like there's a whole thing where Saruman dies and Grima Wormtongue dies in the beginning of this movie that feels very weird, but it's also kind of interesting, and it's so Peter Jackson because like it's like such a gruesome death sequence where
it's
you're
so
like
badass.
It's like, whoa, like it really turned really quickly, but it's still there if you want it, and I appreciate the add-ons, even if they make the movie feel a little bit like not as it's not as trimmed, as and a lot of people complain about the regular theatrical cut length, but like this extended cut, this is 4 hours 15 minutes just about, and like all of them are kind of like that. So it's like,
and that's such a cool part of it, like the kind of take it or leave it mentality. It's part of the reason why I love Dark Souls, because I can play that game for hours and I'll pick up like a stick and it's like an item and it has like a full paragraph of item description. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is a stick that so-and-so used in a battle and whatever, and blah, blah, blah. And so it's similarly, there's a lot in the films specifically that are like, if you care to learn more about them and if you care enough to watch the extended edition, you can take so much more lore and so much more story and really build that world. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. The movie's already 3 hours long. You can just enjoy it like that. And I super appreciate the fact that, Peter Jackson was like, if you want to go hardcore, you can totally do that. But if you want to just go on this adventure, you can totally do that too. And like people should totally feel good about, whatever way they view it. I mean, if they don't watch the extended editions, they're wrong and they should go to jail. But, they can watch it however they want to watch it. But it's just nice to have so much that if you want it, it's there.
Yeah, I think it helps flesh out some things like the Eowyn Faramir thing we talked about earlier. One thing that I think they probably could have done a little better in the theatrical cut is when Pippin finds the Palantir in the beginning. It's like, did Saruman just like chuck that out the window at some point? Because if you don't see that extra portion, you're like, what happened? Like the Ents didn't get up there. It's like, what did you guys do? Totally. But like, there's that kind of thing where it's like it's an add-on. And I think there's even a moment later on too where, oh yeah, there's they add an extra line or a pause when Pippin and Merry are celebrating in Edoras, and Pippin looks at Gandalf and he feels kind of bad, and Merry's like, hey man, we gotta finish the song, and then they kind of finish their song. And that I'm like, whoa, like that kind of changes that whole moment, because you're like, oh, this is fun, everybody's good, and it's like, oh, there's still sadness and darkness coming. Which I forgot to say about this whole film. I've been feeling it the whole time. When I was watching it, it felt like this is like a lot of people use this word a lot now, but Endgame. It feels like everybody's like max level. It feels like it's like the ending of a series of like TV that's been on for 10 years. And like everybody's like peak, like this is what we've been fighting for the whole time. And like I love it, even though in the beginning it's like, hail the victorious dead, we won at Helm's Deep, but like we still got a long way to go. Totally. I love that feeling, and I don't know how they captured it, because they shot all of it like at the same time. Like even the stuff in the Shire, like the beginning and ending of all these movies, they shot like at the same time. Yeah, it's like, it's
really wild.
How did you do that? Like Gandalf's in gray one day, white the next, and it's like, like,
and it's to your point about being sort of the end game, like you're right, like everyone is like max level, they have all their highest level weapons and items, and but again, they're all at the end of their rope. They're all emotionally and like spiritually exhausted, and physically exhausted, and they've really got to dig deep, even with all their high level gear. They're really pressed up against the wall, and push is definitely coming to shove. But like it has, and sort of transitioning to the end of the film, the ring falls and they're on this rock, and they're having these big picture conversations, and then the eagles pick them up, and as they're coming into the Shire, and they're all like dressed in like nice robes on fancy horses with like truckloads of treasure, like they're all very minted as they come back to the Shire. But there is that element of like they're changed. They're not the same people that they were. And there's this scene where they're back in the the tavern,
so good,
in the Shire, and for a moment you're like, oh my god, I'm so tired, what an amazing journey, everything's back to normal, things are great, they're having a beer, and they kind of just sit there and they kind of look at each other, and that sense of normalcy completely melts away at that point, because you're like, oh wait, no, like they've been tortured for years, however long, they've been through like hell and back. And so it's a super sad moment, even though it's like, at least for me, even though it's the end of the movie and it's the sort of resolution of the trilogy, it's super sad, because I'm like, there's no way they're the same. And it's crazy too, because the Shire has been 90% the same, like they haven't been having, Nazgul fly over their head. They haven't been having these battles take place in the Shire. They've just been, life as usual. And so, you have these guys coming back to a place that should feel like home, and they're just very different. I would imagine, there's a lot of connections to like soldiers coming back from war, and I think Tolkien's time in World War I probably taught him a lot about that. And there was a quote that Tolkien had talking about his work in the war, and he was never for very long on the front lines, because I think I mentioned last time he had trench fever, and then he was sort of I forget what they made him after that, but he was kind of like not shooting people on the front lines, but he would say like he was losing dozens of friends every single day. And so you got to imagine that coming back from an affair like that just completely changes your worldview, and you gotta figure it definitely did the same for the hobbits.
Oh, totally. And I love that you kind of talked about this. It's been like 13 months since they set out on this journey.
Yeah.
And they come back. And you're right, the Shire hasn't changed. Even that guy is still that grumpy old dude who's there, who has like nothing. He's like, oh, these kids are back. Like, and it's not like Hobbit where Bilbo comes back and it's like they're trying to take Bag End. It's just like, nope, Everything's just fine, and they're
Yeah.
all just kind of sitting around. And the one thing that's really changed, obviously, is within them. And Sam's just like, he looks at Rosie and he's like, "Forget this." He's like, "You know what? I've
Yep.
been through so much." He's like, "I'm not gonna be afraid to go ask her out on a date." He's like, "I'm Sam. Like I've seen things. This is
Yeah.
nothing compared to what I've done." And I love that he
Exactly.
just is like, "There we go." And
Yeah.
I forget too that there's like a 4 year jump
Yep.
between that and then kind of the real ending, because Sam gets like a family and all this other stuff happens.
Yeah.
And I still wish, because there's like that brief moment where the Fellowship gets back together in Rivendell for just a little bit. They're all just kind of laughing at each other, because that's like a Lord of
Yeah.
the Rings thing. You don't like
Totally.
you don't like talk about you just kind of laugh when you're happy. It's
Yeah.
like
You laugh, and oftentimes in slow motion.
yes, very much
Yeah.
so. There's a lot of laughing in slow motion, which is great. But
Yep.
I still wish there could have been a little bit more of just like them like being together, and just like Aragorn just being like, "Frodo, man, like, well done, buddy. Like,
Yeah.
you did it," and like just kind of hanging out and being like, "Oh, so this is Minas Tirith." But I guess you don't really need that. Again, that's like,
Sure.
I want it 5 hours. I want it 6 hours. Like I want more.
Totally.
Like I'm never sated.
Totally.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I love that you finally get the quest will claim his life, because it's kind of claimed
Yep.
a lot of their lives, but more so for Frodo, because the other three get kind of ingrained back into it. Like they're integrated back into Shire
Yeah.
life, and Frodo's like,
civilian life.
yeah, Frodo's like, and I totally understand that too. I get that, like, of leaving home and then coming back and being like, this isn't enough. Like, this isn't
Yeah.
enough for me. I need more. And that like really hit me this time. And like watching Frodo, and I was like,
Totally.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And just him leaving, and he's just like, I can't. He's like, we saved the Shire, but I didn't save it for myself.
Yeah.
Save for everybody
Yeah.
else. I need something different. And
Yeah.
man, it's so good. It's like,
Yeah, and like when he gets on the the ship, the boat with Bilbo, and like it's super sad. It's very tragic.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been fine if like it cut to Sam or Frodo 4 years later, like also with a Hobbit family, and like he's like, ha, mowing his lawn or whatever.
yeah, exactly.
But like I don't think that would have felt right,
Yeah.
because again they're changed, and they're really they're like wounded, I think, for life. Like you said, the quest will claim his life. There's no way they could have gone back to normal, and so to have that moment, it just felt right. It felt so sad, but it felt really, really like correct for sort of that sequence of events.
I think of the logistics, and maybe it wasn't going to happen right away, but I like to think Frodo left Bag End to Sam, even though Sam goes back to like his house that's attached to somebody else's house. I was like, oh, that'd be so cool if he came back and he's like, hey, Rosie and kids, so we have Bag End now because Frodo's gone forever. Like, that's what I wanted.
That would have been really cool.
That would have been cool to see, but I get why they ended. It's, again, it ends on such a small, like, it's on just a door to a hole in the ground, and hobbits live there. And it's like,
it's a very quiet ending. And for a movie and a trilogy that is so just bombastic, and the scale is massive, it really closes out on like a very gentle whisper. And again, it just feels right. That kind of like the scale of the conflict, it really matches the scale of the ending. The ending is so small and so quiet and so gentle that it really plays super well with how loud and massive the climax was. And I remember watching this documentary about the making of the Return of the King, and they actually filmed the scene where Frodo is writing in Bilbo's book. I think he's like writing like the ending or the beginning, I forget, or maybe he's titling it, I forget.
He does. He does a bit of both. He writes something about Sam and Rosie, I think, and then he also was writing the title or something like that.
So that was actually the very last scene that they filmed of the whole trilogy, if I remember correctly. And I remember there's this moment where like, and because that scene is very quiet as well. It's a very kind of gentle scene. Elijah Wood was saying Peter Jackson made him do that take like 35 times. And Peter Jackson said he did it because he just didn't want it to end. He was like, Frodo nailed it on the first try. But he would be like, cut. All right, let's go back to the beginning. And he did it again. And be like, cut. And I remember like Elijah Wood saying, he's like, yeah, I just didn't understand like why he just made the scene go over and over. And it was just because he didn't want it to end. And because like, they turned into like this family of actors. And, after they finally, when he finally cut, it's a really, really powerful, I'll send you a link after the show, but it's a really powerful shot of Peter Jackson like in tears saying cut, and then he walks over to Frodo and they share this hug, and Frodo is just thanking him like very quietly, like just in his ear as they hug. It's just such a powerful thing. And I think it's just like, man, everything about the way the trilogy wrapped up was just perfect, man. It's so good.
Yeah, it's when I'm usually not the speechless type. I'm a talker, you know, Manny.
Yeah.
But after watching it, especially, I just finished it last night, just kind of going back, and I was just sitting there, and I didn't have anything to say. I like, I even applauded. I was like crying. I was applauding. I was like, I know it's just for me, but like, man, oh man, like I just don't. I don't know. It's hard to find things, you know, on a technical level. Sure, there are some CGI moments that don't look super great, and the extended edition, like I said, it kind of adds things you don't need. But man, it's just so good. It like makes me want to just swear at the top of my lungs, because I'm like, I look at it and it isn't a movie. They aren't films anymore. It's like an experience. It really is something to me, for me. And I try to remember that with like other people who love things so desperately. But as much as I love these other franchises, like, and I think I was thinking about it, Endgame might be the closest I've gotten to like those emotional moments again. But like no other film franchise or film by itself has ever made me feel like that. I'm like, oh my gosh, like it's just so like so much payoff, so much character. Like it's and like the love, like you could just, I feel like I can sense the love coming through it. And I can also sense it because at the end of all the credits, they put everybody's name who is in like the official Lord of the Rings fan club. I was like, movies don't really do that. I'm like, what are you talking? I'm like,
and that's because there's so many people carrying the Lord of the Rings forward, right? And so you know, there's so many people that keep that universe alive and keep it vibrant. And that's why we're getting an Amazon show. That's why we're getting more video games, you know? And so, and I think for, you know, people in our generation, the timing of when those movies came out, we were like young teenagers. And so I think it was just very important, at least to me, you know, the safety and comfort that I felt watching those films. And like I said, like, in every video game, if I can name a place, it's the Shire, or it's like my island in Animal Crossing is called Osgiliath. And so I think you know, like those kinds of fandoms are super important because they're so consistently good. And I don't know if you actually noticed or heard about this, but tomorrow at noon Eastern, I don't know if it's the entire cast, but a bunch of Sam, Frodo, Merry, Pippin, Legolas, Gandalf, and hopefully more are doing a read through of the script of Lord of the Rings live on YouTube.
Oh my gosh, I'll be there with bells on. Oh my goodness.
I'll send you. They did a little like a trailer. Josh Gad, who I think he has like a TV show or something. He got them all together and they did this really cute little trailer where Josh Gad was like, "Hey, Elijah, do you think we could like get together, you know, the team, and maybe you guys do like a read through?" And he's like, "I don't know, I can't make this decision alone." And then Pippin pops up on a Zoom call and he's like, "Hey guys, what are you doing?" And then like Orlando Bloom pops up on a Zoom call. And then like Sean Astin is there, and Sean Astin says something to the tune of like, you know, he's like, I don't think we have enough time to do it. It's just so long. And then Ian McKellen shows up and he's like, you know, and he says the line where he's like, "All we must do is decide what to do with the time that is given to us." And then you know, it splashes to like Sunday, May 31st. And like, I stood up, like applaud, like I've cleared my calendar for tomorrow because like my entire day is dedicated to this tomorrow.
Dude, that's so cool.
Yeah. And so like, and people were like losing their minds on social media. And so like, it's just a testament to like how incredibly strong the fandom is and how much those films really brought together people who, you know, if you don't have the same fandoms for books, you know, but I think the movies really help people appreciate the books. And I think that those two in tandem really created such a strong fandom. I mean, you could like Lord of the Rings online, like just forums, like wiki pages, the Reddit community. It's amazing. And I mean, it just makes me super thankful. I'm just so happy that I can have this thing that I get to like just love so passionately. It feels great.
And I wonder too, like, because of comparing it to other contemporaries with like, you know, Game of Thrones and Harry Potter and stuff, maybe it's because we have the creator, the progenitor is not alive. So like you can't, like, that person, he's not going to make any more things. He's not on Twitter. Like,
Yeah.
he's not like saying things that kind of like can frustrate fans or kind of make more of a toxic situation. It just seems like for the people I meet who say like Lord of the Rings are like their favorite films, and again, this is probably biased towards myself a little bit, but like they aren't people who are like screaming it in my face. They're like,
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings really means a lot to me, and they're like my favorite films of all time. Like, it's just like you could tell right there there's like a reverence for it, and I
Totally.
love that so much because it's just like
Yeah.
they're my people. Like, I
Absolutely.
get it.
Absolutely. And I think reverence is a wonderful way to put it, because we truly revere this series and we truly revere this work. And to have it so beautifully created and like visualized in front of us, it's just a gift, man. Like, we got so lucky that, we weren't like, we didn't die 40 years ago, or we haven't
Yeah.
been born yet. Like, the timing of it is insane. I think of like my little sister, and I'm like, man, what's her favorite trilogy? I don't know, like maybe like she likes all the Marvel. I mean, she doesn't even like all the Marvel films that much, but I'm like, you don't have this thing. I wish you could have this thing.
Yeah.
I mean, like I watched the trilogy with her, but I'm sure it means more to me now than it does to her. But it's just, I feel so lucky that the timing of my life overlapping with these films, it worked out so nicely.
I wonder if this is kind of how people who grew up in the late 70s and 80s felt like with Star Wars,
Sure.
And obviously Star
Yeah.
Wars is more of like a technical thing at the time, but I wonder
Yeah.
if it was just like they felt like it was like, I am Luke Skywalker, like, and like we
Yeah.
feel like we're like, I am or want to be Aragorn, like, like I want to
Absolutely.
be
Yeah.
that guy, like
And I feel like the resurgence of Star Wars now, like I have friends and coworkers who, have gone to Orlando and like done the build your lightsaber thing,
oh
and
yeah,
like I see how much it means to them, and it's awesome. I'll never be one to be like Lord of the Rings is better than Harry Potter, even though it is.
Yeah.
Like
it's true.
quantifiably
It's a
better.
fact.
But like,
It's it's just objective.
But I'll let people believe whatever helps them sleep at night. No, like I'll never, get it in someone's face and tell them why Lord of the Rings is better than Star Wars, because I know Star Wars means so much to them.
Yeah.
And it's great to have Lord of the Rings to mean so much to us. You know what I mean? I will get into fights about who the greatest wizard of all time is, and it's obviously Gandalf.
Yeah.
But other than that, like I'm down to like respect people's fandoms, because I know how much mine means to me, and so like you gotta respect how much it means to other people too.
Yeah, and you hit it on the head perfectly. You talked about it hitting at the perfect time when we were the right age, and I think so often with these things that we love so much, it depends so much on our age, and it also depends on like who we're with when we watch it, what we think about, what nostalgia kind of brings to the forefront. And when someone says like they love, this movie, this game, this book, I also want them to say like why they love it, but then like also when was their first exposure to it?
Totally.
Because I find people for things that I don't care about at all, and they love it so much, and then they're like, yeah, but I like this is something I experienced with this family member, or it happened at this time in my life, and I'm like, all right, now we're getting to it, because now we're talking about that subjective feeling we feel when we consume this art, this entertainment, and like I attribute so much of Lord of the Rings to my mom. And seeing it every Christmas. And I don't know if we talked about this before, Manny, but she loved the books back in college. And this was back in like the early 70s or whatever. And she had like a map of Middle Earth in her dorm room.
Oh my God.
And
your mom's such a nerd. That's amazing.
And she was like, people come in to be like, where's that in the world? And she's like, well, it doesn't like exist. Like it's Middle Earth. And
that's
like, so
cool.
Like passing that on to me and like sitting in the theater with her and like watching these things like come to life. Like that's really special. So like that, or it's like Lord of the Rings will always be like, I'll just always think of like my mom. I'm like, oh my gosh, like
man, that must have been such an incredible experience for her watching those films. Like I watched the films first, but imagine like, I don't know, like imagine reading the Lord of the Rings at age 12 and not getting to see the movies until age 30 or something. Like that must have been incredible. That's so cool, man. That's such a great story.
And also like, well, thank you. And like the quality of it too. It's not like they're like, and the orcs are they're gonna look all right, but it's like when they come on screen, or like the goblins and everything, you're like, oh my gosh, like you're looking at these things, you're like, you could go and touch these things, like they're real things.
And you're like, I read about these guys 30 years ago. This is amazing. That's so cool.
Yeah, and but she also wasn't the type where she's like, well, technically they would have yellow eyes. There wasn't any of that. She's just like, wow, like this is insane.
She's like, everything is great. I love it so much.
Yeah. I also remember like very specific moments, even in Return of the King. I remember running to the bathroom when I was a kid and coming back, and like Cirith Ungol was just popping off, and there's like this green like laser beam shooting to the sky, and I came back, I'm like, Mom, what is happening? She's like, well, so the Witch King, he's like, they're starting the armies with a laser went in the sky, and it's okay. And I was just like,
That's so cool.
It's like I left at the wrong moment.
I love it.
It's yeah, man. But so again, so like for people, I think try to remember that too. If you're out there, if you're like you love something, or if you don't love something, and someone talks about how passionately they love it, remember that there's probably a lot more going on there. Think of it like an iceberg. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing,
yeah, man.
Oh my gosh. We should start to wrap this up a little bit.
Sure.
But I just want to go over these really quickly. The battles. You talked about Osgiliath here. Osgiliath is a little bit of a sleeper hit as far as battles go. It's got this really like kind of creepy like stealth vibe to it on both sides. There's like a little arrow ambush at one moment. It's very like dire. I really enjoy it. And you named your island in Animal Crossing New Horizons Osgiliath. Is Osgiliath like one of your favorites?
I think it's just, it's the capital city of Gondor. It's like it's like the home of men. It is like the kingdom of men. And my favorite race in Middle Earth are the men because they're relatable and they struggle the same way people do. And I don't know. I just always thought it was great. I think there's something like very like guttural about Osgiliath. It just feels good coming out of my mouth. But you're right. It's such a cool city. It's like right on that water. So like has this weird like swampy approach. I think it's just one of the raddest places in Middle Earth.
Yeah, I think it's great, and it's cool to see it again, especially after the fact that like we saw it in Two Towers getting assaulted, and you're like, they're still kind of holding it, and it's like not going super well. Yeah, and they have to fall back to Minas Tirith, which the battle of Pelennor Fields, and then kind of like Minas Tirith. That whole fight is like Helm's Deep to another level. I don't think it's as compelling as Helm's Deep, even though there's like more stuff going on, and the ladders are bigger, and all like bringing Gron, the wolf's head, like kind of battering ram in is like this amazing moment, but like it's still so cool, and it's crazy too if you go back to Fellowship and see that like Gandalf's already been there. He like went to study the ring back at Minas Tirith, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that was so long ago. But the way they show that city off right in the beginning, where he's kind of going up and up, and you're like, wow, you get a really good feeling for how big that place is.
Totally. And I think it's cool having a sense of like geography, right? Like if you get a sense of like where Minas Tirith sits in comparison to where Osgiliath is, and then like if you get a sense of when all the beacons are lit, you're like, oh, okay, so these cities are very far apart from each other. So like it's something that I really, appreciate about Dark Souls, where like if you go to a certain part of the map, and let's say it's on a mountain, you can look down and see like the undead burg, like where you started. Sure. And it's like, oh my God, you get a sense of like how everything kind of connects. And so I think it's just really cool in the films how you really do get a sense of like geography and where things are positioned in relation to one another. Yeah.
Oh, and you brought it up there, the tower lighting sequence. So good. I think that's the music they played again and again during like the 2003 or 4 Academy Awards, when they just kept giving awards all night to Lord of the Rings. They gave like 13, and I was like, it's about time, which was so funny. Those years, some of my favorites, just because they're like, and let's see the nominees for best makeup, and I'm like, why bother? I was like,
just call it the Lord of the Rings award and call it a night, man.
Just run it all. But I love that sequence. A lot of people kind of point to the lighting of the beacon sequence, which is unfortunate for the gentlemen who have to sit up there and like wait and just get excited when something's on fire. They're like, oh my gosh, finally. They're like, yes.
And then they do it and they're like, should I go or now what?
Exactly. It's like, and then Aragorn just like, they call for aid, and Theoden could have been like, well, that's too bad. And he's like, no, let's go. I love that sequence. But the music, like, oh my gosh, like I hope we've made this clear. The music is really it's a 10 out of 10, and I really mean that. It is perfection for me. I think there's no way like it could be better. Like I listen to it, and I'm like, this is all just like, I don't know how you could do it any better. It's perfect.
100%.
It's perfect. But anyway, kind of finishing up the battles here. Battle of the Black Gate, not as crazy cool. Like it has its moments, obviously, with the eagles and whatnot. It's not, I don't think, as compelling as like when the Mumakil, charge in Pelennor to that extent in that kind of fight. But I still enjoy it for what it is. How do you feel about that?
I think it's totally acceptable, and I think the scale of the Black Gates is really cool. So I think just like as a setting, I think the setting overshadows the combat and the battle itself. But I think it's just like a rad looking place.
Yeah, oh, totally. And it's cool to see it, too, again, after Two Towers, where, like, Frodo and Sam are gonna, like, bolt straight in there. And it's just like...
Let's try to get there before the dark. It's like, dude, come on. Like, yeah.
Yeah, like, you're not gonna make it far, boys. I love you. You try so hard. So good. But yeah, those are kind of the big battle sequences that I wanted to talk about. Just because Lord of the Rings, there's the battles. I do love the catapults with the severed heads or
Oh,
whatever. Like
it's
that's a really
so
good scare tactic. I was like, in a PG-13 movie, I was like, there's a lot.
yeah,
A lot
really
of, I
hardcore.
was like, wow, there's
Totally.
a lot of heads flying here. Also, there's a little extended bit where the Witch King destroys Gandalf's staff, which is not in the regular version.
Yep.
Kind of weird. It happens, and then he hears like the Rohan horn, and he's like, "I gotta go," and he just
Yeah.
leaves her like, "Dude,
See you
take him."
later.
I'm like, "You said you're gonna take out the wizard. Do it right now." Like, I don't want Gandalf to die, but he's like, "I've got
Right.
other things to attend to."
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of a funny moment, and I enjoy it. I wish there was like a little bit more of a fight with the Witch King. That would have been nice.
Totally.
I don't know
Yep.
if you felt that way at all, or if you're just kind
No,
of
I
like,
totally agree. I think it would have been a really cool conflict for sure.
yeah. Oh well, we can always. I'll just dream of what that looked like, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay, Manny. Is there anything else you want to say about this that
Oh,
that you
man.
want to wrap up with a little bit, to some extent?
Yeah, let me pull out this scroll that I mean, I could talk about it forever. It's just it means so much to me. One of my friends reached out yesterday or the day before on Twitter, and he was like, "Hey, man, I watched the Two Towers show, and I had no idea you were so into Lord of the Rings." I'm like,
Yes.
"Oh my god, I love it so much." He was just like, "Man, that's so cool that it means so much to you." And it was just like a nice moment where I could be like, "Yeah, I love Lord of the Rings. It's great."
The show's
Because
bringing people together.
for sure, man.
Yes.
And so yeah, it's just like an amazing journey, and I'm sure I will rewatch all three in the next 30 days or less. So yeah, man. Again, thanks for giving me an opportunity to just blab about Lord of the Rings, buddy.
Dude, it's my pleasure. And again, we could both go on and on about this.
Yeah.
Like we could do an episode for each character, like for each one, or
Totally.
each battle sequence, or each like different setting. Which this movie has some great settings. Just like Mount Doom is just a wallpaper, baby. You like look at
Yeah.
that and you're like, oh my gosh, this looks
Yep.
so good. They move around a lot in this movie too. Oh my gosh. But yeah, I appreciate having someone on here who's as passionate, if not more so, than I am, because I love Lord of the Rings and I put it on this pedestal. And even after all these years, after finishing it the other night, I was still like, "Yep, it still hits me. It just hits in
Still the
different
best.
ways. Like it's just
Yeah.
like I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like a
Totally.
transcendent thing." And it's just because it was like they even joked about it being like the biggest indie film that was ever
Yeah.
made, because it was just like that's how they made it. It wasn't made by committee necessarily. It was like
Right.
these three people came together and were like, all right, how are we gonna do this? And they like wrote it all up, and then it was just like all these other talented, crazy talented people and passionate
Yeah.
people who just like, I'm just gonna make chainmail for 2 years or whatever. It's like, oh my god, you're gonna do that. It's
Yeah.
like, good on you. We love you
Yeah,
so
it's
much.
rad.
So thank you to, and I doubt anybody, well, you never know, but if anybody here knows anyone or they're watching it and they helped in any way to make the Lord of the Rings films in any stretch from just like the littlest input to the greatest, thank you.
Yeah.
You've never made,
I'll
there's
find
never,
you and I'll hug you.
yeah, I want to hug you. Like
Yeah.
I just want to do one. I would just want to do like a bow, like Japanese style, and just like smash my head into the ground where there's just blood everywhere, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
thank you so much, like arigato gozaimasu,
Yeah.
like just like it's like one of the greatest things I've ever gotten to experience as a person. And I know it sounds
Totally.
hyperbolic, but for the love of everything that's holy and good in this earth, it is just, man, I love it so much. Oh
Just
my
the
gosh,
truth.
like it's the truth. You're right, it's
Yeah.
the truth. So thank you to everybody who made these things, because they hold up, and
Totally.
it inspires me to make things that hold up, and I want to make things like this, because this is the stuff. Like, not every movie is going to be Lord of the Rings, but I just wish bigger things with crazy budgets would like look and say like, okay, how can we craft stories that last and stand the test of time, like Lord of the Rings has done.
Totally.
It's just
And
so
it's
good.
great too because there's so much content that's contemporary and new content that's still coming out about it.
Yeah.
One of my favorite podcasts is called "That's What I'm Toking About,"
Nice.
and it's this young woman who's reading the books for the very first time, and so she reads the books and she'll do an episode on whether it's like a handful of chapters or a part of the book, and she does it with a guy who I forget what he does. I don't know if he does this in a professional capacity, but he's like a Tolkien scholar. Like he just knows all of his stuff.
Oh.
And so it's cool to like follow along with somebody who's experiencing the books for the very first time. And like, she'll have like theories about what happens next. And sometimes you'll be like, she's so wrong. But like,
Yeah.
it's great that she's like building this. And other times I'm like, oh man, yeah, she picked up on some good foreshadowing there. And like I mentioned last time, Hello Future Me, there's just so much content that we can consumed like today. That came out in the last few years, and it's been whatever, almost 30 years since the movies came out. And so it's just great that like it's the gift that just keeps on giving. Like if you want to learn all about the lore, like YouTube is endless. You will
Yeah.
find lore on everything. So it's awesome.
Oh, for sure. Is she gonna like watch the movies after, by the way, with the books?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that would be cool if she like watched them after she finished, watched like the Fellowship after she finished the book and kind of did it that way. But it's super fun, and it's a super high quality production quality podcast. So definitely check it out if you're interested.
I'd have such a hard time like if I read the like Fellowship and then watched the movie. I'd want to watch the next one immediately because
Mm-hmm.
especially Fellowship, it just ends and you're like, that's it. And you're like, yeah, you're sitting
Yeah,
there for like 4 hours, and you're like, but
yeah,
there's more, right? And you're like, yeah, there's more. And you're like,
right.
let's put it on
Yep.
right now. That's good. Yeah. Man, it's just so hard for me to find anything I don't like about these movies. Everything's perfect.
Yeah,
Just about, like I said, there's a few things with like some of the effects they don't hold up as well, but like, man,
sure.
the score, the acting, the costume designs, just like the settings, just all of it, like the choreography, the fights, like the characterization of like the interpersonal connections. It's all just it's beautiful. It's beautiful. I'm glad I
It's
never had to
really
review
good.
these movies because it would have been really bad. I would have been like, objectively and subjectively, they're perfect.
Yep.
And I'd be like, anybody else who says anything, that's okay. That's for you. But we all know it's true. All right,
Yeah.
that's okay. All right, if you want to love other movies more, that's fine. You're wrong, but it's okay.
You're just incorrect.
You're just incorrect. It's just a fact. It's a scientific fact. No,
Yep.
but it's you know what? I try to keep this in mind though. For again, like I said before, people who love things so much and they feel the same way about their thing, whatever that is, that I do about Lord of the Rings, and that's cool. That's great. That's wonderful. And also, like I said before, it's a nice way to connect with people that have like minds, like Manny here.
Yeah,
Like because like
absolutely.
when he's like, oh yeah, I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, I'm like, oh my gosh, that just means you're even better than I thought you were. And like I'm like, this means we're more connected than ever because it's
Yeah,
like,
man.
yeah, Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I know a long time ago someone was gonna like try to build Minas Tirith. Did you hear about this?
Oh my God! Like in real life, building
Yeah, they
this
wanted
series?
to like
What?
build Minas Tirith, and like I remember my family, like one of my sisters, like you should go. They're like, would it be crazy if you just like start like you built it and you just built a little home in Minas? I was like, I can't even imagine. Like,
Yeah,
and I don't know
that's
how
what
far that project
spared
got.
forever. Like,
Yeah, I just don't think it's gonna
yeah,
last. I don't think
I've
it
seen it.
happened.
I've seen it built in like Minecraft and stuff, which is so rad. And I've seen
Yeah,
it like build in different like digital settings. But yeah, to build it in real life, that'd be the biggest and most costly construction project in the
oh
world.
my gosh, yeah, I couldn't even imagine. Just they're like, all right, so we need more like gigantic white blocks, like of
Yeah,
marble
like
maybe,
let's
or
get
what?
white marble,
Yeah.
but like all of the white marble, you know?
You're like, okay, unless somebody's got like billions of dollars you want to throw at
Yeah.
this thing, we're probably not gonna make this.
Yeah.
Like, oh
I
my
will
gosh.
say, a handful of years ago, I went to India and I got to see the Taj Mahal.
Oh,
And I mean, that's probably, I don't know if this is a fact, but it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, white marble structures in the world. I mean, it's one of the wonders of the world, but I remember like the scale of it is insane. Like, I took a picture of it from very far away, and the people are like ants,
oh
and
wow.
the building is huge. So, yeah. So, maybe it's possible, but I feel like you would need like 8 times the amount of white marble on the Taj Mahal to make Minas Tirith.
Yep, we're gonna need their buyer, whoever
Yeah.
that was. We're
Yeah,
gonna need
exactly.
that number. We're gonna start to wind down the show here with just the two last segments of the show, and the first one I always like to talk about the games we've been playing, the TV shows we've been viewing,
Yeah.
what I like to call time killers. So Manny, has it changed in the past 2 weeks? What have you been killing time
Not
with?
really. Actually, I guess it has. I started playing The Forest, which is like a survival crafting kind of horror game.
Yeah.
And I mentioned this just before the show. I play it like once a year for like 3 or 4 months at a time. So I'll re-download it. I'll get super deep into it. I have like this borderline like OCD thing where I'm like, I want to have like double walls and defensive spikes, and I like making like shelves that are all like organized by like what materials are in them. And this game just like serves all of those needs. It kind of just lets you build things however you want to build them. And it feels super good. And so I've been playing that with my friend Katie, and that's been super fun. I started yeah, I guess that's actually it. That's probably the only difference since 2 weeks ago when we
Yeah.
talked about this. And I don't know if I mentioned it last time. I started watching Sons of Anarchy again, which just
Sam
is a
Crow.
great one. Yeah, man. And so I finished Breaking Bad, and I was like, you know what, like Sons feels like a worthy follow up to Breaking Bad. So I started Sons of Anarchy again. I watched it in college many years ago, so I've forgotten a lot of the story points. So it's nice to go back through that. And that's kind of it. Yeah, man. I rewatched the John Wick trilogy because I love that trilogy very much.
Dude, yes.
Really good. But yeah, I think that's about it.
Do you
What
have a
about you?
favorite? Do you have a favorite John Wick, by the way?
I gotta say the first one,
First
just
was
because
great.
it like didn't know what it was. It wasn't aware that it was that good.
Yeah.
And you can kind of progressively see, and this happens a lot with sequels and trilogies, where like with each movie, you can tell the budget gets bigger. They get a little bit more, kind of too big for their britches. I mean, John Wick 3 is amazing, and it was super fun to watch. But like one was like this weird, like I don't want to call it like a cult classic, but it was just kind of like this, like, where did this even come from? And I recently learned that the guy who directed John Wick 1, he's never directed before. He's a stuntman by trade. And
Hmm.
so that's why the fight choreography is so good. And it's just so badass and slick. So yeah, John Wick 1 is fantastic.
Dude, yeah, it's just a nice pure vengeance story. It's like double
Totally.
vengeance in a way.
Yep.
Yeah, it's great. For me, I have been playing through the Gears franchise. I've gotten through Gears 2 now, and I'm playing Gears 3.
Nice.
And Gears 2, Gears of War, if for people who don't know what I'm talking about, Gears of War 2, those games hold up really well. But Gears of War 2, I think now with perspective, that campaign I think is my favorite. There's so
Yeah.
much crazy stuff going on in that game. They're always trying to change up the formula of what's happening in a third-person shooter, which I really enjoy. And it's like not only the settings, but the weapons, like the moments, set pieces you get into, like these crazy situations that they didn't maybe necessarily need to do, but I'm glad that they did.
Yeah.
And it's such a great game. But Gears 3 has been good too. I also finished up Final Fantasy 8, which I never thought I'd be
Oh,
saying.
awesome.
I beat Final Fantasy 8 with the help of plenty of people, but mostly Missile Mage, who's somebody who checks in all the time. It's one of his favorite games. And man, oh man, I don't know how we beat it, but we did. So I was like, okay, there we go. Like we had almost no health at the end of these, like the last boss, we still managed. But
That's
that game
rad.
is trippy. It's such a weird game. I see why people are kind of like not big fans of it because it ends on like a
Sure.
really strange note. But yeah, there's been that. And then obviously Lord of the Rings is what I've been watching and trying to. Oh, I restarted Hellsing Ultimate, which is on Funimation.
Oh,
For
nice.
anybody who's never seen it, it's really kind of a crazy dark show, but it also has kind of funny moments too. But basically, it's the story of that this Hellsing organization that has made this incredibly powerful vampire named Alucard. For people who know Alucards, but Alucard, different than the one you get in Castlevania. He's this incredibly powerful being that they use to go fight other vampires. And it
Awesome.
kind of deals with them and their dealings with the Vatican, and the Vatican doesn't really like that they exist, and they kind of come to blows, and it's
Yeah.
fascinating. But yeah, Crispin Freeman, who people would probably know as doing a ton of different voices, like Winston from Overwatch,
Oh,
and
nice.
he does Itachi Uchiha. He voices Alucard. He does an excellent job, and it came out in 2006, I think it is. But there's like a original Hellsing that came out in 2001 that I have not seen, so I don't know, but I went back to watch this one, and it's like 50-minute episodes, and there's not many of them, but they're like really good. It's crazy. It's a crazy show. Check out
Nice.
Hellsing Ultimate. That's my recommendation. Anyway, let's get to the last segment of the show, which is my personal favorite. It's community feedback and questions. So let's start with a little bit of feedback first on the good old Lord of the Rings, because we got some on Discord here.
Cool.
This one comes from Bearded Scotsman 86. He says, only thing that comes to mind is the line about no man can beat me, and she takes her helmet off. I always like that bit, even if it's cheesy. I think that's a good bit too.
Yeah, it's a great line. And if I remember correctly, the book line is slightly different from the movie line. I think it's like, I don't want to get it wrong, but I think there's a really slight discrepancy, but the sentiment and the message is exactly the same.
Sure, yeah. It all meant the same to the Witch King, who got a sword in his face. He's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
See, those guys can take a torch to the face, but they can't take a sword to the face. Like, come on, boys. Ryan's fault, he says, like I've said before, still never watched Lord of the Rings. One day I can ask a question. Oh my gosh, you need to do it. And then Fragan in here is telling us, he's like, there's a Lord of the Rings reunion on Zoom on their YouTubes. So we're gonna, don't you worry about that. We're gonna get to that. I'm stoked for that.
Yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
We had this nice young gentleman on Twitter under the @ of Jules VZ.
Yeah, Julian, wonderful guy, amazing
like a nice guy.
musician. He's like such a talented dude. He was the one that reached out to me and was like, I didn't know that you love Lord of the Rings so much. Good friend of mine, awesome dude.
Yeah, and I was really happy that he saw that and he enjoyed that, because that's like what this show is supposed to do. It's
Yeah,
supposed to
man.
entertain, but also bring people together, which is great.
Definitely.
So I had him. I pressed him because I wanted a question from him if he had one. He said, "Having reached the final part of the trilogy of Lord of the Rings, which character's journey or arc do you think you enjoyed seeing progress most through the trilogy, and why?" Manny.
Yeah, man, that question, I saw that question last night and I was like, this is such a hard question. It's tough, man, because, like, again, I think there's so much relatability with like Aragorn and his struggle as like a man and as a human who can be corrupted and stuff. But I also, like Sam's journey, like we talked about, he goes through this like really, the purity and innocence that he starts with and it ultimately sustains throughout the trilogy. I think he stays pure, but he makes this crazy leap of not faith, but like he really just doubles down on his mission to help Frodo. And so I think his arc is really tremendous. Man, if I had to pick like and then of course like Frodo, like just he is just like corrupt. He's getting corrupted like so hardcore, and like again he ultimately loses at the end, and so that it's such a tragic arc that he goes through. If I had to choose one, I guess it sounds cliche, but I'd probably say Aragorn, just because like he struggles so much with his own identity and his own sort of like stance and his place and his destiny and his fate. And I think there's just so much that like we as humans can relate to and appreciate in his journey. And so like his journey from the ranger in the prancing pony to wearing the crown at the end of the trilogy. I think it's just a tremendous story for him. What about you?
Well, if you're cliche, then I will echo that cliched sentiment. Aragorn is just, he's so good. And to quote my good friend Manny, he's such a good hard counter to so many. And I love that about him, because the older I get, the more I could see in the nuance and kind of like the comparisons you draw to him being like the best that men can be, even though in the eyes of many, even other men and of his like girlfriend's dad, they're like, this guy sucks. And then like over time, they're like, oh, we have to accept him because he's a really good dude. And he like, I feel like he's so selfless in a lot of instances, or there's times where he has to give up things, like when he says bye to Frodo in Fellowship, or when he has to like, he throws himself into the fray after Haldir dies at Helm's Deep. And you just like get these things where it's like, man, this guy, he's not like anybody else. And like, that's someone to aspire to be. And he, again, over time, even at Helm's Deep, before it kind of starts up, he's talking with Legolas. He's like, well, I'm going to die as one of these guys then. And like, it's one of these moments where he's finally accepting, like, I should stay, I should fight. Like, this is what I'm going to start to do. And like, and then everyone starts to see that. And I think they could probably do a better job of this. It's mostly Eowyn who's like, well, she kind of uses it as a cover. She's like, but the men love you and they would follow you to battle. I wish there was like more guys who are like kind of slapping on the back, like, Aragorn, yeah, man, you're the best. Like, but I love that transformation. And it's just like, he's a good guy that gets even better. Like, he doesn't really have any bad moments. You know what I mean? Like,
and his fears are, they're so just. Like, he's scared that as a leader, he'll get corrupted too. And he's scared that, the blood of the men who have faltered before him are in his veins. And so, but he consistently does these selfless, just actions, right? He like saves people's lives. He gets out in front of the battle and he's like in there, in the fields. But then at any point, if anyone is ever like, hey man, you're great, he's like, nah, I'm just doing my job. You know what I mean? So just an amazing story arc that he goes through. It's really tremendous.
Yeah, so basically, this has been the Aragorn podcast.
Yeah, this is the Aragorn
We're really
show.
Excited about it. One day we'll get Viggo Mortensen on, even though I don't know if he'd really want to sit here and talk to us about all this. But a great performance.
Like, I have other movies, and we're like, no, you don't.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when I watched Hidalgo, I kept thinking, Aragorn, somebody should be protecting Gondor right now. Why are you riding a horse? Even though Hidalgo is a great movie. It really terrifying movie. If you're an animal lover. You're like, please. Guess what? It's a happy ending there. I spoiled Hidalgo for you. But yeah, great question. Thank you for writing in. And anybody in the future, if you want to write in, if you have a topic, if you have a movie you want me to cover with a guest of any sort, please, all you have to do is tweet at me, use the hashtag Critical Podcast, and you can find us at GoCritical, or you can find me personally. I'm at Jimmy Good 013. But if you want to tweet at Manny, tell him how great he is. Talk to him about Lord of the Rings or anything else, really. Manny, where can people find you?
Yeah, please talk to me about Lord of the Rings all the time, forever. You can find me on Twitter. I'm at I am Jitsu. That's JITSU. Yeah, man, I love talking about Lord of the Rings. So bring it on.
Lord of the Rings, more Lord of the Rings, please. I'm really hoping that
Yeah,
TV show is good, and it makes me want to go
same.
back and like rewatch The Hobbit, because I was thinking like after this was done, it's like I could go for some more Lord of the Rings, that world, and The
Yeah,
Hobbit at least puts me back in that world. So that's what
definitely.
I'm
Sure.
appreciative of. So, thank you to everybody who watched this. Thank you to everybody who's donating to us on Patreon and supporting us through all the various means. You guys mean the world to us. You guys do not need to do any of that, but I appreciate those people that doing that there or over on Twitch, or just even watching the videos and sharing them. Honestly, if you enjoy this sharing, that's great, but I'm just glad people are, enjoying it to some extent. So
Yeah,
please send me
absolutely.
feedback if you have any, and let Manny know if you want him back on, because I always want Manny on, but Manny's a busy guy, so we can't always be talking about Lord of the Rings with him. Otherwise, it'd be like every week I'd be like, so Manny, let's talk about the first 25 minutes of Fellowship. You'd be like, all right, let's do it. You're like,
Oh yeah.
yeah. Manny, again, thank you so much for being here. It's always a pleasure to get to talk to you.
Likewise, buddy. Again, any excuse to talk to you is a good one. Any excuse to talk about Lord of the Rings is a good one. You put those two together, and I have a great afternoon. So I appreciate it, man. Always fun.
Well, the pleasure's all mine. Likewise, my friend. Well, thank you, and thank you to everybody who's watched. I appreciate it. And until next time, just remember to adapt and overcome. Bye-bye.